So I live in the UK, Devon, with my dog. It's important to note that there's a huge expanse of woods behind the house that I live in. Now, early last month, this thing that looks and sounds exactly like me began to show itself directly to me, but I fear it's actually been around for much, much longer than that. About 4 years ago, my parents, grandmother and cousins were over at mine for a get-together. I remember my mother going to smoke around the back, and not even a minute after going out, she comes back in all sort of flustered and asking me why I was outside in the woods like that. She said that I was staring at her blankly. The thing is that I really wasn't. I was inside with my grandmother and dad the whole time. My mum, bless her soul, passed it off as just seeing things, and stupidly, so did I. Cut to last year though, I was in my lounge when my dog ran off into the conservatory barking like mad. This wasn't really all that surprising, as we do have quite a few rabbits and other vermin around the area. That was, until, I kid you not, I heard my voice talking in the conservatory. I checked outside, but nothing at all. Last month, while cleaning the kitchen, I saw me outside in the wood. It looked one for one with me as well, and this person or thing, whatever it is, it didn't move an inch. It was like a statue. I froze in place. I guess it was more the shock of just seeing myself with my own two eyes physically. I leapt over the conservatory door, but gone. It was just gone. In the split time that it took me to go to the door, this thing was nowhere to be seen. Last Saturday, I was upstairs on a work assignment when I heard my voice asking to be let in. My dog was going absolutely nuts and got worse when this thing was clawing and scratching at my windows and door. I instantly contacted the police, and I'm away at my parents' house for the time being. I don't know what to tell people or if they'll even believe me. I really want this to end. So, if you have any advice, then that would be much appreciated, because I am dreading when I see this thing again or what I'll do. I've never really experienced anything paranormal in my life until, well, just recently. To be honest, I wasn't fully sure that I believed in ghosts, but I like the stories, I guess. The other night, me and my best friend were having a sleepover at my house, and around 1:30 in the morning we decided to go down into my kitchen just to get some drinks. Now, I have a bathroom off my kitchen, so I decided to use it first thing. I walked in, closed the door behind me and locked it. I live in an older house with not many renovations, so the lock in this door is one of those stupid ones that you have to push in until it clicks. I'm like 100% sure that I closed this door as well, but after halfway through me doing my business, the door suddenly flung open and the lock popped to be unlocked. I immediately tried to close it desperately because I was embarrassed, and when I tried to, it felt like someone was pushing on the door to open it. I opened it a little to see if it was my best friend, but no one was standing there. After that, it seemed to sort of let go, and I just closed it and continued on, weirded out, and quickening my pace to see what my best friend wanted, still telling myself that it was just him. When I walked out, he was halfway across the kitchen. I asked him if he opened the door on me, even though there wasn't a single chance that he did, and he obviously denied it. I just sort of shrugged it off and started pouring myself a drink. I then heard little light footsteps approaching me from behind, and I assumed it was my cat, but there was nothing there, and there was nobody there when I turned around. At this point, I'm not really scared, but just sort of confused, I guess. Me and my best friend wrapped up what we were doing, and we started heading upstairs. But in the end, me and my best friend just sort of wrapped up what we were doing, and we started heading up the stairs. From the top of my stairs, you can sort of still see into the entry of the kitchen, and I swear to you that I saw feet and legs standing there. I stared at it for a few seconds to make sure I just wasn't psyching myself out, or that it wasn't a shadow or something, but I know what it was. We quickly ran into the room and stayed up for a bit before we got my confidence to go to bed. That night, I had a terrible dream about this spirit in my kitchen, and it was extremely aggressive towards me. I woke up in a cold sweat, and I just couldn't sleep again. Around 2 p.m. the next day, my friend had left and my parents were at work, so I was alone. I was in the kitchen boiling some water on the stove when my electric kettle randomly turned on behind me, and I mean full speed boiling as if it had been boiling for minutes. I quickly turned around and I looked at it until I realized that it wasn't even plugged in. And I mean, there's no way that this kettle would work without being plugged in. I pushed the button to turn it off and then plugged it in to see what was going on, and now all of a sudden it won't work at all. I quickly went to my room and remained there until my parents got home after that, because it weirded me out with what happened the other night. Later that night, I was in my room and my TV turned on out of nowhere. I didn't sit on my remote or anything too. I mean, it was across the room entirely. Now it's 2 a.m. and an hour ago someone started aggressively banging on my bedroom door. My parents are asleep and snoring and the cat is on my bed. Nobody else is here, but the cat is freaking out, so I don't know. What should I do about this? I went to Colombia for a vacation. I have always liked South American countries, more than anything because my parents almost always went there to spend some short vacations. So you could say that I followed their tradition, I guess. I had already rented a house to stay there when I was away. It wasn't the best in the world, but it worked. Anyway, I slept in a small room with the television pointed directly in front of my bed, just as it should always be. And behind the television there was a window that I always opened when it was very hot. I closed it when I was going to sleep at about 12 at night. Now, I remember that night I was watching YouTube videos and other nonsense on the internet, just sort of killing time while waiting for my food to be ready. However, like the sound of an alarm, I started hearing a sound that I could only compare to with the sound that a sort of didgeridoo makes. It immediately threw me off. I put my cell phone down and took a quick look at my room. I thought for a moment that it was just some random person who, for incomprehensible reasons, was playing an instrument in the street. But it only took me a moment to notice that there was a face that was shamelessly peeking out of my window. His face seemed to be sort of partially melted, something that was noticeable more by the shape of his head than by his skin. The latter, with a mud color, seemed to be worn out and almost in a state of decomposition. What I mean is that he had no nose and his eyes were completely circular and also black. His mouth seemed to have a small smile on the right side, but on the left side, it seemed to be broken almost, but perhaps unintentionally showing an extension of his mouth on that side, forming a smile up to his cheek. His mouth had nothing inside either. It was only black. The sound of the didgeridoo that I could hear only increased all the tension and fear that I had at that moment. But I stopped trying to understand what that thing was and suddenly began to think about my safety. I ran as quickly as possible to the kitchen and took out a knife, and I returned. I stared at it. I was pretty terrified, but that didn't prevent me from at least preparing for any attempted intrusion in my house of that creature. His face remained static, although the sound didn't stop. After maybe 4 or 5 minutes of looking at it and sweating, the creature finally moved its face, turned to the right, and then it left. And the sound it made also disappeared. I ran towards my door and I saw its shadow under my door. At that moment, the lights outside of my house were already on. I was almost paralyzed by the entire encounter. I've always believed in sightings of impossible things, but seeing or reading about them on the internet is something completely different from experiencing them in your own life. I knew that what I saw was not natural, The window, with all the fear running through my body, was closed by me minutes later. Obviously, I couldn't sleep after that, nor could I really concentrate on other things. I was just thinking, trying to give an explanation to what I had seen, and if he really was just a messed up tramp who wanted to spy. That theory, although disturbing, I preferred it. But it just wasn't possible, since the place behind the window has no way for someone to lean on it to look, because it's about 2 meters off the ground. In that park, there were cracks on the ground too that had left an unfinished construction. So what I mean is that there was just no human way a normal person could look into that window from there. This is the first time that I've shared this publicly. I don't really like talking about it because I know it makes me seem a bit crazy, but I just felt like I had to share it. And who knows, maybe someone out there might know what this is. So one day, me, my parents, my sister, my uncle, my aunt, and my 2 cousins were out at the park or something. I don't remember what place exactly this was, but we were walking, talking, etc. until we got to a part where there was a rocky beach, and I was following my older cousin while my younger cousin was behind me. We were jumping from rock to rock while talking. I don't even remember what we were talking about, and as we neared the end of the rocky beach, I looked down to see where I was going to jump next, and when I looked back up, they were just not there anymore. What I mean is that they just vanished, both of them. So I yelled out their names, but nothing. There was no one there. Not my cousins, my parents, my sister, my uncle, or my aunt. I looked around, and after maybe 2 minutes, I left the rocky beach and tried looking for them. It looked like they were nowhere near me though, and I didn't have my phone with me, so I couldn't call them. So there I was, lost and with no idea where the rest of the group was. Thank God that I remembered where the car was parked, so I walked all the way back to the car and waited almost an hour, and they came back. Everyone was apparently worried about me, and everyone was okay, but even my cousins were there, and I asked where they went. I told them what we were doing, and my cousins told me that they left the rocky beach way before reaching the end, so I was just there, dumbfounded, like, what the heck was that then? Who was I talking to? Why did they look and sound exactly like my cousins? Why did they suddenly disappear like that? Were they trying to separate me from the group? And if so, why? Does anyone have any idea what actually happened that day to me? When I was about 18 years old, I was living at my mother's house, which was 2 houses down from my grandmother's. One day I was biking to my grandmother's house, and I rode into the driveway, got off my bike, when I just felt something. Note that I'm pretty sensitive to things. When I sense something, I see a sort of image of what it is in my mind's eye. Anyways, I turned around and I saw a glimpse of a humanoid body with a deer head looking straight at me with my physical eyes. I then see someone who was also curious going over to it, where I saw it that is, but they found nothing. I then went over and looked around the stone wall, but there were no signs of tracks or anything. I spoke to this person briefly and asked them, "Hey, did you see that?" And they were like, "Yeah, what was that?" So I know that I wasn't going crazy. But does anyone know what this could have been? I don't think it was a Wendigo or a skinwalker or anything, but I have heard that there's a Native American lore of them being called not deer, or like the deer people or whatever, so I don't know. But if you have any thoughts on this, then please do share. This first encounter took place in the summer of, I believe, 2016 in Ontario, Canada. Although it was a while ago, I'll admit, I still remember every detail like it was yesterday. If I'd been alone, I would have chalked it up to just something else, but the fact that both of us saw this thing, here's what really puts me off. So, a friend and I were walking along a trail that runs alongside the main river that cuts through the city. There are some great wooded trails along the river, and some of them even lead to neighboring cities, but I digress. The sun was setting. It was at that time of the evening where it was insanely dark under the tree coverage, but still fairly light beyond the leaves. I turned on my phone flashlight to light the way and put on some music for the two of us to listen to while we hustled home. The bugs were starting to bite at this point, and being so close to the river, they were pretty nasty. I'd paused to change the song on my phone at some point, and my friend glances to our left into the woods. She asks me, "What's that?" And instinctively I turn the lights to where she was looking. In the darkness of the bushes and trees, we watch as this thing takes off running deeper into the brush with its back turned to us. It was making a ton of noise, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. It really didn't seem to care. Now, there are lots of deer on this trail, and I've seen a few on my walks during the day, but this was absolutely no deer. Even in such a short amount of time, the image of this thing running from us is burned into my mind. It was on all fours. It had a sort of awkward gait like a human trying to run on its hands and feet, meaning that its arms were far too short compared to its legs to be running like that. This thing was white, and the light reflected off of its leathery-looking skin. It was skinny with thin arms and legs. The two of us didn't stick around much longer after that, and instead chose to run the rest of the trail until we hit the end that led out into a set of soccer fields. Now, we never really spoke about it after that, and if we ever did, it was sort of just in passing. That was, until yesterday. You see, I was scrolling through a subreddit for my city and paused the minute that I saw a title informing people to stay away from the river trails. Curious, I checked the post out, and the post, it described exactly what my friend and I had seen that night on those exact sets of trails by that river. I broke out into a cold sweat and immediately texted her, despite not even speaking for a while, as adulthood had kind of caught up to us both. She told me, though, that she still thinks about that encounter and does so at least once a week. I linked to the post, and she was floored by it. I won't be giving the link as it gives identifying details and, the internet and all that, but reading through the replies, it was what you would expect from Reddit, I guess. People chalking it up to the guy being mentally ill, joking about him doing drugs, and people who genuinely took him seriously were being downvoted and mocked. Someone mentioned that it was all bull and that the stories of these things had been going around in the area since 1972, meaning that this probably wasn't a one-off experience from the beginning. I'm always a little bit hesitant to share this story, out of fear that I'd get the same reception. I know what I saw that night, though, and knowing that it's possibly still in those woods along a set of trails that I still walk to this day, well, it is kind of unsettling to me. In the summer of 2022, my last camping trip with my family, we went to a popular camping location in Ohio. If you can figure it out, well, that's a bonus to you, but my sister and I, me 17 at the time, and her 14 at the time, shared a tent, so we stayed up giggling and messing around quite a bit, like or talking about boys that she liked. And mostly for week 1 in the 2-week trip, it was fine. We slept and talked like normal, until the second week where things took a bit of a turn. Now, I have a really hard time with sleeping, so when week 2 strolled around, my sister would be passed out asleep, and I would be sitting there, wide awake for hours at a time. While these hours where I sat awake just passed by, I heard noises, crunching, shifting, growling, howling even. The basic outdoor noises, though. For the next 2 days of week 2, I heard a lot of walking and talking in the woods, though. Things like "come here" or "help me." Sometimes I'd even hear faint whispering near my tent. Honestly, it began to scare me, and on the last 2 nights, which probably had been the worst, my sister was awake, both of us playing Uno with her phone dead and mine on a cool 20%. At around 2 a.m., my sister went to lay down and so did I, until I heard thick footsteps around the tent. Much too heavy for deers or wolves, but way too light for bears or elk. Honestly, it was almost like a person was walking around my tent. My sister was awake and quietly watched as someone or something pressed on the tent sides and door. Now, my sister and I move all of the little tent zippers into our tents at night to keep people from trying to get in. Clearly, this person or thing was looking for said zippers as well. So, while we were scared, we felt pretty smart about it too. This was night 4 of week 2. Now, obviously we spoke about this and told people and all that, but they said that we probably were just hearing things. And on the final week 2, night 5, the same heavy footsteps, the same touching at the walls and the same whispering to come here and come out were all around us. I was terrified and waited until 5 a.m. where I sat outside waiting for my grandma. While sitting out there, I then heard whispering and then screaming, the scariest, most blood-chilling scream that I'd ever heard. It sounded like some kind of a mixture of animal or person or something, but it was so loud that I nearly wet myself. I was glad that we left in the end, and even happier to not go back for 2 years. But my question for all of you is, does anyone know what this is? Or was it just some dude lurking on our campsite and trying to creep us out? Also, I talked to my grandparents about this, and they said Tater Tot, their little American shepherd at the time, had been snarling at something outside the tent walking around. Whatever it was got scared and let out a sort of husk or a growl, and it ran away. It was about 3 a.m. for them, and it scared them too, so they heard some things as well. Anyway, like I said, if you have any information on what this could have been, then please do share it with me, because I have trouble just not thinking about this. So I was 11 at this point, and I used to wake up at like 3 a.m. constantly when I slept alone. This would always happen when I would sleep in my room. I have no problem sleeping alone at my grandmother's house, for instance. And it really messed up my mind, but I got used to it over time, I guess. Sometimes, though, I felt really anxious and I would feel like I was being watched. Then I would immediately rush to my parents' room. And on this particular event, I woke up at 3 a.m. like normal and felt so anxious that I didn't even have a second thought and straight up ran to my parents' room. They took me in and I slept in between them, and after like 3 hours I woke up again, which is odd because I always slept peacefully when I was with my parents. So I started checking my mum, but she wasn't there. Then I started checking for my dad, and he wasn't there either. I remember I was sandwiched between them though, if that makes sense. So I started panicking. I immediately got up and switched on the lights, and they weren't in their bed. I checked under the bed, the toilet or the washroom attached to the room, my toilet, and then I went downstairs and checked the living room, dining hall, and other toilets, and the kitchen too, and they were just nowhere to be seen. I started panicking to the point that I'm about to burst into tears. In the end, I actually did. Then I checked if their vehicles are still here or not. The vehicles are untouched. Then there was one more room left to check. It was my grandmother's room, paternal, and for some background information, she and I are not in good terms. She doesn't really love or see me as her granddaughter, from what I've seen, and she's unbothered even if my parents disappear in the middle of the night. So I banged on her door crying hopelessly, but luckily, she did open the door and I started explaining to her what had happened. And she said, "Oh, we'll look for them in the morning then," and eventually took me in. Luckily, I slept with her, and the next morning my parents came looking for me. They didn't even know that I was not there until they woke up and they were sleeping in that same room that I was the whole night. But I really need some answers to this. Did I just get transferred to a different reality or something? I don't know, but this experience just really messed me up. I mean, my parents literally just were not there. It's honestly like they just disappeared. This happened to me when I was a teenager, some years ago, but I still think about it sometimes. So me and my 4 friends were on this 1-hour bus ride to go to my parents' house just to hang out. We were sitting and chatting in the back of the bus. The bus is empty, except for us and this middle-aged man sitting a couple of seats away from us. He looked like a normal businessman, I guess, on his way to work or something, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. After a while, we noticed that he was behaving kind of weirdly. He was chugging down beers rapidly, which is not that common on this bus, and also it was in the middle of the day. He was also pretty openly flipping through an adult magazine and kind of muttering to himself as well. And I mean, okay, weird, but we didn't really get too bothered by it. After a while, though, he then began to approach us, sitting closer and small-talking to us a bit, asking how old we were, where we were headed, and so on. We kind of just reply politely, but try to end the conversation pretty quickly since he's creeping us out so much. Apart from the beer drinking and the magazine, you can really sense that something is wrong with this guy. I mean, he's grinding his teeth a lot and has this blank stare like he's looking right through you, not really there, if that makes sense. Anyway, when we stop talking to him after a while, he just sort of sits there silently and stares at us for a while, breathing heavily like he's getting more and more agitated. And after a minute or so, he suddenly leans forward and pulls down the sleeve of his shirt. On his arm, he has a big pair of sharp-looking scissors duct taped to his arm, with the sharp end pointing up towards his hand. He starts stretching out his arm and making sure that we all see the scissors and says, "Does this make you respect me? Am I getting your respect now?" We just sort of sit there with our mouths open. I'm terrified at this point, not really sure what to say or do, and panicking because I'm not sure what this guy is capable of. After a moment, he leans back again and continues staring at us, not saying anything more, and we don't say anything either, afraid to set him off, I guess. We get off at the next station, all jittery and full of adrenaline after that weird encounter. If I wasn't a clueless teenager, I would have called the police at that point, but we didn't, and I still think about it sometimes and wonder what a guy like that, who is obviously unhinged, is capable of. And if he ever did something worse than just scare some teenagers by acting crazy. So, believe me that it is with extraordinary skepticism that I relay this story to you all, but I'm at the end of my rope. So, 2 days ago, my husband, 43-year-old male, and I, 46-year-old male, were in Hollywood Forever Cemetery on our way to a celebrity grave that we go to fairly regularly, even weekly in the summers. I passed a rather unremarkable grave en route to it, and just after, I remember that I saw a young man in front of it who looked at me and said, "Hey, we were born in the same year." I turned to my husband and said, "This is going to sound terrible," but cutting myself off, hoping that I'd have nothing to tell him as I approached the grave to confirm what I had heard. I moved the succulents surrounding the dates aside and really didn't want to see that the year was, in fact, 1977. My husband came over and I was speechless. He saw the 1977 and explained what I had heard. I tried not to make too much of it, but how exactly does one accomplish that? On the way out, I had to stop by again. The energy around the space had worsened, and I asked my husband to hang back this time, having felt specifically that his presence was not wanted because he couldn't see what I saw. At the grave, I felt as though he had asked in some way if I was going to make a spectacle of him now. I tried to assure him no, but I don't think he trusts me. Before the line went dead, so to speak, I had this feeling that he didn't want me to tell anyone about this. At this point, I should explain that these occurrences, they were not completely uncommon to me as a child. I don't actually see these things, but remember seeing them as a memory, I guess, seconds after the experience. Some more background too is that I was fascinated with the supernatural from an early age. I was in the gifted and talented program in grammar school, and every independent study project that we self-assigned was on some feature of the paranormal. I became obsessed with tarot cards and carried them around everywhere in a repurposed index card box. And to be honest, I just never thought that the things that I saw were uncommon. When I was around 8 or 9 and in summer camp, an, I'm sure, teenage softball counselor instructed the other boys at practice to beat me up before he joined, because I was more interested in doing readings than sports of any kind. The fight was interrupted and I was brought to the nurse and then the owner's office where my parents were called. They came, threatened suit, and made sure the counselor was fired, and that I knew that my camp would be comped for the next however many years. Nevertheless, they blamed me for it the whole way home. I threw the tarot cards down the incinerator and have tried to keep all of it under wraps ever since, and have developed into I guess you could call a total skeptic as my adult life began, disbelieving and forgetting what happened to me in my youth. But 2 days later, and this experience is still sitting with me, and I don't like the feeling. I told a trusted friend, and while his reaction was unremarkable, later today during a movie I was enjoying and focused on, I saw a light that would be difficult to describe in words. Very symmetrical, as solid as a crystal but made entirely of light. I asked my husband if he saw it, and when he replied no, it disappeared and my glasses fogged up. I know that sounds crazy, but they filled from the bottom up and it was weird. I took them off and asked my husband to turn on the light, which took a minute. I took my glasses off to clean them, my line of vision still blurry without the glasses. When he turned the light on, everything was clear as day though. And though this is nowhere near as concrete as a date literally written in stone, I cannot help but feel the two are connected and was filled with the same negative energy that I felt at that grave. Anyway, I expect telling the world about this is not going to go over too well, but I'm just losing my mind over this and I'm desperate for some feedback and or direction. I'll update this if anything remarkable happens after I finish this, but anyway, thanks in advance if you have any information or help or whatever that you can pass on. This happened around 2021 in India, around COVID period when the lockdowns were still very much in effect. My dad, he used to live in another city, my brother was in college, and my mum had a government job, so she had to go to her office every day, which meant that I was basically left alone from like 10 a.m. to around 6 p.m. Now, we used to live in an apartment unit, but it had 2 doors. One was the main door and the other one was located in the biggest bedroom, basically my parents' room, but the door was clearly locked with an actual lock from the outside, and it also had a metal sliding door as well. It was the one with the chain structure. I'm from India, so you can Google elevators to find out what I'm talking about, but it was also locked from the outside as well. We had a ring bell on the outside, but it was just sort of connected to a small bulb in the bedroom. Sorry for this being so long, but you have to get the gist of this area to understand this story. So, one day at around 12 p.m. I was in my room, which was basically adjacent to my parents' room, and I felt, I don't know, sort of weird, so I just went to check their room. I went to the room to see the bulb blinking, and somebody was ringing the doorbell. My mum used to say to ignore it because if it was somebody that we knew, then they would never ring this. They would know that the real door was at another side of the house. So I stood there for a moment when the person started knocking really hard on the door, like it was straight up rattling. But the thing was, due to the metal gate in front of it, it would be very hard to put your hand inside to knock at the actual door. Even I couldn't put more than half of my palm in there. I was also a teen back then, so I wasn't that big. And this man was straight up banging on it somehow. I got scared and called my mum, who told me not to panic, but I was really weirded out by that, so I locked my parents' door with the lock that they had and went downstairs to chill in my brother's room. It was one of those days where my mum straight up wouldn't return till like 8 p.m, so I was alone for a long time, and I was scared to even go upstairs at this point. Around 6 p.m, our helper auntie came, and I was a little better that somebody else was in the house at this point. And during that time, I used to take private tuitions, and my teacher used to come at around 7:30, so I felt better that I'd be having some people over soon. Our main door had a big window just beside it, so whenever someone was at the door, we used to open the window to check who it was before opening it. But Auntie had a bad habit of opening it without checking. Like, you sort of memorize the timings of people, so you open it because you know that it's going to be them. Fortunately, that day, when the doorbell rang, she opened the window and then she came to my brother's room to tell me that I apparently had a cake delivery. Thing was, I didn't, obviously. So I went out to check through the window, and there was a man with a cap hiding his face holding a very small box. Now, a cake box is very square and big, right? Even a pound cake has a pretty big box, and in India, we have a very small sweet box. So imagine like a 100-gram sweet box being called a cake box. And I asked him who the delivery was for. He didn't give me any name, not even the company, just told me that it was for our flat. I called my mother and asked if she had made the delivery, and she didn't know what I was talking about. So the dude was just like, accept the box and open the door. And by some miracle, my teacher walked up the stairs and asked what was happening. The dude saw my teacher and instantly ran up the stairs. We lived on the first floor, and we let our teacher enter. Later, when my mum inquired about a delivery guy coming to our flat with our security guard, he said that he wasn't there at his post for around half an hour when it had happened, and we didn't have any CCTVs in our building, so nobody actually saw him. Now, all of this, it definitely shook me up a bit, and I asked my mum to at least come quickly from her office on the next day, and I didn't stay upstairs when I was home alone too. It was a weird experience, and I still have no idea what that guy wanted, but the fact that he wanted to get us to open the door probably means that he wanted in on our house. And after that, I'm confident that what he wanted was no good. This happened when I was about 9 or something. I'm not completely sure. But my friend and I were playing in my room with Barbies. We took a quick break when she had to go pee. I decided that it would be fun to hide behind my door to scare her. When I stood up and wanted to hide behind my door, I saw some sort of a creature though. I always thought of it as some sort of an alien, but it could be something else. It for sure did not look human though. I don't know how it looked exactly, but I do have a vague memory of how it looked. This being because it was just so long ago. When I saw it, I felt intense fear though. That I remember clearly. I couldn't move or breathe and my heart was going crazy. I don't know for how long I stood there, but eventually I walked out of my room and my friend came out of the bathroom. We both went inside my room and we just went to play again. At that moment, I don't remember what happened, but still felt extremely scared. I must have looked scared too because she kept asking me if I was okay. I'm not sure when, but maybe a few days or weeks later, I started to remember what happened that day and got extremely scared to sleep. I never told my parents, and I mostly kept it to myself. They just had to deal with me being scared, I guess, but I told my little brother a few years after it happened. But every time I talked about it, or every time that he would joke about it, he didn't believe me. I would freak out and this intense fear would just fill up my entire body. The picture of it standing there and the fear I felt, it always stuck with me. I recently talked about it with my oldest brother because my younger one brought it up as a joke. My oldest brother really does believe that it could be an alien of some sort, since he also believes to have seen one when he was younger as well. So, does anyone have the same experience or any idea of what this could have been? I'm also planning to ask my younger brother if he remembers me telling him any details about how it looked, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. I was at a friend's house for a weekend with a bunch of people, and we all went for a walk at some point. She lives right at the edge of the countryside, where there's fields and woods and whatnot, so we went down this forest path. Me and this other guy, we started exploring a bit deeper into the trees, and we'd gone quite far down a hill into the thicker trees. But then, there was this clearing. There was a big log laying on the ground, and resting on it was a skinned deer. No bones or anything, just the skin and its head and antlers. The head, though, was on the log, eyes missing, and the skin was just sort of draped down the front of it. But beside it was a crucifix made out of planks, not just sticks, and tied up with bale string. Me and this guy freaked out a bit, and I called out to our other friends to come and see, but he told me not to show them because they'd find it too disturbing. He then shook it off and started climbing back up, but I just stared at it for ages, so long that he waited for me and told me to walk away from it. There was also this string attached to the crucifix that ran further into the woods, but following it probably wouldn't have been a good idea, so I went back. I still cannot comprehend what it was, though. Some kind of pagan ritual? Some kind of prank? I mean, not many people walk this forest path besides locals walking their dogs. Plus, we'd come pretty far off the path at this point too. My friend that lived there said that people didn't hunt in these woods, but I didn't want to push it with questions since I'd been told not to tell her. I understood as well. I mean, I wouldn't want to know that there was something like that going on in the woods behind my house, but I find that the lack of answers has me thinking about it more and more. I often think about it, and think about the fact that it was just the beginning of a horror movie, where all my friends and I are killed off one by a forest witch or something. I mean, it was the perfect setup. Friends hanging out at a country house for a weekend, two idiots go deep into the woods and find something disturbing, death ensues. Whatever the case may be, though, I still feel it was kind of a bad omen at least. Unless I just really don't know anything about hunting and that this is regular practice for people who hunt deer in the woods or something. Can anyone offer me some insight on this? Was this a sick joke? A deeper meaning to it? Or is this regular hunting setup? What if it's a curse? What if seeing this cursed me, and if sharing all of this now will activate the curse or something? I guess I'll have to see, but like I said, my thoughts have gone wild on this because I just really want to know what this is. I, a female in my 20s, was in a new city, trying to navigate back to my hotel. It was beginning to get dark out, so I started getting anxious and picked up my pace, even though I was on a main road and there were still lots of people around me. In my rush, though, I turned down the wrong road, unfortunately. After a very short amount of time, I noticed the road looked pretty empty, and it was definitely darker further down it. It gave me the creeps, which made me realize that I must have turned down the wrong road, so I turned around to go back to the main road. But that was when I noticed that some guy was walking close behind me. I'm not exactly sure how to explain how close he was to me. Not so close that he was in my personal space, but he was close enough that it was uncomfortable. He looked creepy too. He was wearing a black sweater with the hood pulled up. His hands were in his hoodie's front pocket, and it looked like he might have been holding something too. I only got a brief glimpse of the front of him because right after I turned around, he quickly turned around too and sped walked away from me, back onto the main road, and then vanished around a corner. It sure seemed like he was stalking me, and it was really weird, especially with his hands in his pockets like that. And I mean, why did he turn around right after I turned around too? And why did he walk away like that? Did he suddenly realize that he also went down the wrong road? I seriously doubt that. Every summer, my family and relatives would always rent a cabin in different parts of Sweden, and it was always wonderful for weeks on end. This one time, when I was about 10 or 12 years old, I saw something that still sticks with me 13 years later. We rented a cabin in the upper south of Sweden, far away from any neighbors or cities. We were staying up late one night playing cards, and I just got a laser pen from my grandpa. At around 12 or 1 in the morning, I went outside to see how far my pen could reach into the forest. I was sort of standing on the grass a few steps away from the cabin, and a few steps away from the tree line. It was a full moon, and I was not at all afraid or feeling creeped out from the dark forest or anything, and just stood there playing with the laser for a bit. But suddenly, I just got a really bad feeling, a mixture of sort of true fear and of being watched. I looked around, but it just seemed to be me there, until I saw a white face with black hollow eyes among the trees. Even though the eyes were black holes, I could see that it was looking at me as it passed by, like it was walking very fast, but its face was turned toward me. It had a black hooded long cape and black long hair hanging down under the hood. It was really tall, like 2.5 to 3 meters, and moved so quick that it's just not possible for a human to move that fast. Also, the silence was so weird. It made no sound when I really should have heard branches snapping and leaves rustling while it moved, but there was nothing. I completely froze when I saw it, and didn't know if I actually saw what I saw. But I didn't want to find out if it was real or not, so I just ran back inside, and I didn't go out at night alone again after that. I have no idea what it was that I saw, but I never have seen the same thing again. I remembered it when I heard a story of someone seeing a pale face with black hair in a lake once. I tried drawing it, but it didn't turn out that good, so I don't know if it helps or makes my story clearer or whatever, but anyone who knows what it could have been or has had a similar experience or encounter or a sighting or whatever, I would really love to hear it, because this is something that I just cannot forget. So, I live in a 3-bedroom apartment with my husband and cat. We've been living here for a little over a year now, and in the past year we've experienced some unexplainable phenomena, I guess you could say. The most common being doors being opened after we shut them. We shut a door, we leave or walk away and come back and the door is fully opened again. We've also noticed heaters being turned on, and neither of us have turned them on. We've brushed a lot of this stuff off, as we do have a cat and we're both ADD, so we figure maybe we just forgot about opening a door or whatever. But the more it happens, the more we question it, because all of our doors have doorknobs, so it's not like she can grab them and twist them. And we might forget things from time to time, but not as often as we've been noticing things. I've had it happen a couple of times where I'm showering and I hear the door open, but I look and it's shut. I've also experienced the door opening while I'm in the shower and nobody is there. The apartment community is older, but the vintage magic tricks my husband collects should be even older. I told my husband the other day that if there is a spirit in the apartment, it's probably from his vintage magic trick collection. We joke about it from time to time. I really don't know if spirits can just attach themselves to inanimate objects like they do in The Conjuring or not. But if they could, you would think that they would be generalized to where the magic tricks are located. But all of the instances have been throughout the apartment. Anyways, the reason I'm sharing this today is because this morning, my husband woke me up early this morning asking what I wanted. I didn't understand what he meant because, I was asleep. And he said that he heard me say his name. Later in the morning, he asked me if I remembered saying his name at all. I told him that I might have been sleep-talking or whatever, but I don't really talk in my sleep, usually. Actually, I don't think I ever have. At least nobody has ever said anything about it. Plus, where he heard the voice was not in the bedroom anyway. I decided to look into spirits mimicking people and found here on good old Reddit that this is actually pretty common apparently. If that was a spirit or whatever, what does it mean if a spirit is mimicking you though? Should we look further into this, or am I just being dramatic about it? I really don't know. I don't feel scared or concerned by it, I guess. At least not yet, but should I be? My story is from 2014. I was 19 years old and it happened in the middle of the day, between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. I can't remember exactly. I was in Morocco, in a very small village of 30 people, near a beach in the Atlantic coast. There were 2 dogs in front of the house to protect it. My family wanted to go to the beach, but I was starting to get flu symptoms, so I decided to stay in the house and just rest, even if I would be alone all day. I didn't want to catch a cold at the beach or whatever. From now on, I have to say that I did not take any medication or anything else to feel better, so it's not the case of hallucinations or anything. But I was laying in bed, just reading a fantasy book. No music, no TV, nothing that could do any sort of noise or whatever. At some point, I heard the 2 dogs barking really loudly, as if an unknown person was coming or whatever. I went to the window quickly, but nobody was there. No family member, no stranger, nobody. A few seconds after hearing the dogs barking, I started to notice that I was hearing another noise, a very strange noise coming from the kitchen. It was like whispers. It was as if 2 or 3 women were whispering some sort of incantations in the kitchen. At that, I was terrified. I didn't know where these whispers were coming from. It was not from the pipes, nor from the wind or anything. There was no wind that day. But it was just there, floating in the air, and I couldn't do anything to make it stop. After about 3 minutes, the whispers and the barking, they stopped simultaneously. Since that day, I'm always afraid to be alone in remote houses like that, especially if no one is there. And I'm also afraid of dogs as well, I guess. I never knew what happened that day, and I never actually asked anyone what it could have been. I've never had any other weird experiences before or since then. I'm not the type of person to believe in things like this, so I try to have a rational explanation about this experience, but honestly, I just can't explain it. And so I would be happy to get your theories as to what you think this might have been. So, I used to work at a nursing home. As most of our patients are the elderly, there's obviously plenty of deaths that occur at our facility. I worked down in the dementia care ward, and there was a lovely resident that I cared for. Her name was Beth. She was unfortunately put on hospice a few weeks ago, and she met her untimely death 3 days ago. She was 92. As a residential care associate, it was my job to clean out the room for a new resident. As I walked into her room, it felt really cold. Too cold, in fact. And that is weird because all nursing homes are always hot because the elderly get pretty cold easily. I just felt a kind of cold that was bone-chilling, though. I tried to shrug it off as I took the sheets off the bed, but as I was bending over to take off the fitted sheet, I swear to you that I felt a push. It felt like cold hands pushed me with strength that I'd never felt before. It happened so quick that I was just confused and scared. I quickly grabbed all the sheets and I booked it out of that door. But when I turned my head around, I saw it. I saw a human-like figure, a shadow in the closet. It was a quick look, so I couldn't really identify the person, but I can't help but think that it was Beth playing a prank on me before she departed to the afterlife. as me and her would always play pranks on one another while I took care of her. But to be honest, I don't know if that is actually the case. So yeah, that's my encounter with the paranormal, and I really don't know what to think about it. So, for context, my parents bought this small clock from a thrift store about 4 years ago. That's whenever my experience, and also subsequently my parents' experience, with this spirit or demon or whatever it is, really started to take fruition. Whenever my dad first hung the clock up on the wall, I got this sense of uneasiness, and it felt like something was watching me. I chalked it up to me just being paranoid at the time. Whenever I went to sleep that night, though, I was woken up at like 1 in the morning due to some knocking on my bedroom door. I didn't get up to get out of bed because I was afraid of what could hypothetically be on the other side. I ended up falling back to sleep, and I get up the next morning at around 11 in the morning. I was eating cereal at the kitchen table. My mum was making breakfast and had almost all the cabinets open, and my dad was outside working. Why does this information matter? Because all of a sudden, a bag of chips that I had in one of the cabinets gets literally flung across the kitchen. My mum was near the cabinet the chip bag had just got flung from, but I know for a fact that she didn't touch them. After that weird occurrence, nothing else really happened for like 2 straight days. Everything weirdly seemed to just go back to semi-normal again. Until everything just wasn't normal again. It was 11 p.m. on Friday in October of 2021. Me and my dad were both awake at that time, and we were just talking. He mentions that he feels something burning on his arm. He looks at it, and there's 3 scratches that had just appeared out of literally nowhere on his arm. All of a sudden, too, our box fan that we used to fall asleep to every night, it was just plugged in and in use, mind you, just turns off sort of randomly. I get up, walk out of my bedroom, and then the microwave turns on by itself, and then the kitchen light, and then the washing machine as well. And then every electronic and light that I'd mentioned was turned on, all got turned off together at the exact same time. Everything just goes suddenly quiet. Mind you, the power was still working. We checked that, so it was weird. The very next day after all of this, me and my dad got my grandparents to exorcise the house. I got some holy water, my grandmother had some anointing oil, my dad had a cross and some sage, and my grandpa had a Bible as well. Each of us go throughout the house, cleansing every last inch of it. After we were done, the house just suddenly began to smell like stink bugs for like 5 whole minutes. And then, just as quickly as it had arrived, it left. And nothing has happened since then. I mean, small things happen every now and again, like me waking up every single night in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning. But then again, I can't really sleep all that well, so it probably doesn't mean much. Oh, and I'm also really depressed now too. Like, I was super happy 3 weeks ago, but now I'm just sad and I find it hard to leave my room. So, my question for all of you guys is, have I been or am I living with a demon, a ghost? It's definitely something, because if it wasn't something, then I wouldn't be talking about it and asking for answers as to what this might possibly be, I guess. Is this something that I should just get used to, or is there something that I can do about it? When I was in high school, my friend Claire came to sleep over. We made some plans to sneak out and hang out with some guys, and then one of them would drive us home. We go out to my friend's apartment, have some fun, and around midnight we decided that it's time for us to head back. But when we ask to be taken back, everyone says no, despite previously agreeing to bring us back. Everyone said that they were too drunk or too high, so eventually we decided to just start walking back, and we would make some phone calls to see if anyone could pick us up and bring us the rest of the way back. My house was a good 20 minutes away by car on the highway, so there was no way that we were walking all the way back. The apartment was towards the back of the complex though, so we start making our way to the entrance. We don't even get halfway there before a car sort of slowly starts rolling up behind us. I was 15 or 16 at the time and very naive to the ways of the world, so I wasn't too concerned. But Claire, she was a bit smarter than me on this night. She tells me to start walking quickly, so we start walking faster. The car also picks up their pace behind us. Again, she tells me to walk faster, so we start moving as fast as we can, and that's when the car pulled slightly in front of us and two of the passenger doors open and two men get out. Realizing that there's no walking faster to get out of this situation now, she instructs me to run, so she takes off running and I follow her. She runs towards a group of parked cars and jumps behind a pickup truck, and for a minute, we just hope and pray that we weren't spotted. This is where details get a little fuzzy for me because this was like 10 years ago, but one of them must have gotten back into the car at some point, as there's only one of them following us behind the truck. We hear a set of footsteps quickly approaching, and she quietly indicates that we're now going into stealth mode. This man is on the other side of the truck that we're now hiding behind. He's circling the truck looking for us, and we're sort of slowly and quietly circling it on the opposite side to avoid being spotted. It felt like a scene from a movie or a video game, but we somehow managed to do 2 or 3 circles around the vehicle without being detected, and by the grace of the gods, he gives up and decided to go back to the car with his buddy. This is our one shot to get away. She tells me to run again, so we run for what felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably only 15 to 20 seconds. We find the pool house area and find a spot to hide. We were hiding behind some fences and bushes and were anxiously waiting to see if they discovered us. Their car pulls around to the pool house and we're biting our nails hoping that they don't stop and get out. The car slowly drives away and we realize that, thankfully, we haven't been spotted. We were safe for now, but the car circled around the apartment complex for hours. They just seemed to refuse giving up looking for us. We were safe for the time being, but now we needed to find a way out of there. It was the middle of winter, and of course we were dressed to impress the guys that we went to hang out with, so short shorts and revealing tops, and we were freezing. Eventually we found a dirty, disgusting Captain America blanket that we huddled up under while making phone calls to find someone to pick us up. We tried contacting the guys at the apartment, but nobody answered our calls. None of our friends even answered our calls too. We felt completely alone and hopeless at this point. But at around 5 a.m, someone finally answered and said that they would pick us up. And that was the best news that I had ever heard, perhaps in my entire life. Our friend eventually gets to the apartment complex, but they can't find the pool house. The group of men are still constantly circling around, so there's no way that we're coming out of hiding. We managed to figure out where our friend is at with a little bit of detective work, figuring out what building they're facing, what's in front of them, are there dumpsters nearby, etc., etc. We figure out exactly where they are, so we make a run for it. We spot their car and we hop in as quickly as we can. We tell them to go and our friend speeds off towards the entrance. We pass the group of men on the way out, and that was thankfully the last we saw of them. We made it back at around 6 in the morning, just in time to sneak back without my parents ever knowing that we even left. If Claire hadn't have been with me that night, I do think that I would have been abducted, perhaps sexually assaulted, and who knows, maybe even possibly killed. I'm really thankful for Claire and our friend that picked us up that day, but it's a big middle finger to the adult men who we went to hang out with as teenagers, but especially to the guys that intended to harm us. On a happier note, I'm now very diligent and aware of my surroundings, and we washed the dirty Captain America blanket and shared custody of it for years after this encounter, as a bit of a reminder of that night. In the end, thankfully, we were able to get out of that situation unscathed, but we definitely learned some pretty important lessons that day. This happened to me just this morning, and while I don't know if this is a really big deal, I have a bit of a hunch that it might be. So, I walk to the bus stop every morning to go to work at around 6 in the morning, and today was a particularly dark morning. It was freezing and it had been raining. My street is the last one in the neighborhood. Behind my street is just the woods, no houses or street or anything. And for the 7 months that I've been working there, no one in my street really goes out to work at the same time as me. Only one guy in the next street that sometimes goes out in a hurry. Today though, I was walking, just had crossed my street, and all of a sudden I hear a noise not too far from me. When I turn back, there's like an older guy, I'm female and 23, trying to walk silently behind me. He doesn't look like he's going to work. He has no backpack with him and not even an umbrella. It was raining. Apparently he got out onto my own street at the exact same time as me, like maybe he was waiting for me to get out of the house. He was walking slowly, but when I started to walk faster, I looked behind me and he was walking faster too. So I kind of ran a little, terrified with my little taser that I always carry in my backpack, until I get to the bus stop where some guys always wait for the bus with me. I waited to see if the creep would show up in front of the bus stop. If he was going somewhere, he would have to pass the bus stop, because there's really no other way to go out. But he never did. I guess he must have given up when I ran. The worst part about this, though, is that I do know that there's an old creep in my neighborhood that was apparently in jail for being a serial rapist in like the 90s. He served his sentence and today is a free man, but like last month he was asking my mum to take care of our garden and he kept creeping around the house when my dad was at work. I don't know if it was him today because it was dark, but he's the first one that came to mind, and something tells me that it was him. When I was 17, I went to a concert with my friend. The concert was in the main city. I lived about 40 minutes drive away. I told my mother that my friend's parent would be giving me a ride home, because there was no way that my mother would have let me make my own way home during the night. When I think about it now, I really don't know why I lied. My friend was getting a bus home that left her right outside of her place. If my mother thought that I was getting a ride, she would have picked me up herself, but I think that I was just trying to be independent, I guess. And I didn't think that there would be any trouble because I was getting the tram, which would leave me a 10-minute walk from home. And it was a Friday, so I thought that there would be a lot of people getting off the tram at the same stop as me and would have to walk even further to get home. But I was wrong. There was barely anyone on the tram. I took notice of this too because I got in the tram hundreds of times by now, and I thought that I could handle myself. I was a physically strong girl, and I was about 5'8" at that time, which was considered tall. I just put my earphones on and I listened to music like I always did on public transport. I got to my stop and got off and started walking home. But there was someone walking behind me. It was a man. I couldn't see his face. It was kind of dark and he had his hood up. From the way that he was built, I'd say he was maybe in his 30s. He was around the same height as me and visibly more muscular. I still didn't think anything of it because I live in a very populated place after all. The town has like 40,000 people and the housing complex that I lived at had hundreds of houses. There was only really one route to get out of the tram stop and into the main town because it was beside the motorway. Once I had gotten by the highway, I suddenly had a weird feeling. The guy was staying back and purposely sort of staying behind me. I could just feel the eyes burning into the back of my neck, and it was only then that I thought that something was off. But I told myself to Just stop overreacting, because we all have to go through the same route, and my housing complex was the closest complex to the tram stop. I picked up my pace and I prayed that there would be no traffic lights that had to be followed. I didn't want him catching up to me after all. I had the urge to increase the music volume on my earphones to be more oblivious to it, I guess, but my gut was wrenching, telling me not to do this. After what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes, I finally got to my housing complex. There's different lanes and twists and turns for each house cluster in the complex. To get to my house, there's a lot of sharp turns and even a steep hill. I thought that once I got to the entrance of the complex, the man would just walk by, but in the end, he didn't. He was actually catching up to me now. He was walking faster and like he had something to get to, that something probably being me. It was literally like a predator stalking prey, and this was the point that he was ready to pounce. I wanted to stay calm. I mean, I wasn't a great runner and my shoes weren't exactly ideal for running either. If I ran, my chances of getting home would definitely decrease. I felt in my pocket for my keys, making sure that I'd have them ready to unlock the door, or in the worst case scenario, as a weapon. I was still trying to convince myself that maybe he lived in a complex as well. But I knew that he didn't live at my housing cluster. Well, we all knew our neighbors. I had the sharp turn ahead. It was only steps away. I was praying once I got there that they would just go in another direction to the other cluster of houses. I got to the sharp turn and I was ready to let out a sigh of relief and call myself an idiot until I heard his steps. They were getting quicker now, louder and heavier. My house was in reach. It was only down the hill. If I sprinted, I would be there in 30 seconds. But I didn't want to chase down to my door. I walked faster, not too fast to let him know that I had alarm bells screaming in my head, but not too relaxed to get caught either. I could hear my breathing hitching. I was finally walking down the hill. I didn't hear any steps anymore. I was finally at the last turn, and once I got there, I saw him. Out of the corner of my eye, he was standing at the top of the hill, just watching. At that point, it couldn't have been any more obvious that I wasn't being paranoid. I walked down the turn. My house was out of sight from the hill. I still heard no footsteps. I finally got to the point where I was unlocking my door, stepping inside and locking the door from the inside. I was finally safe. I didn't notice either until I was in my house just how much sweat was dropping from my forehead and my lip. I didn't notice how much I was shaking or just how difficult it was to really breathe, but it was okay. I was home, and I was in my home with my 2 parents in arm's reach. Thankfully, I never saw that person again, and I think I just sort of blocked it out in the end. I just kept denying how terrifying the encounter actually was, I guess. I once again just kept pinning it to my general paranoia. It wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I could look back on it and see what a dangerous situation that I was actually in. Every time that I think about it, it feels like my blood drains from my body. It was a really scary moment in my life and something I really don't like to dwell on. I'm sharing this while the incident is still fresh in my mind. It occurred around midnight of Saturday, September 2nd, and each day that goes by I feel more unsure about what I really heard that night. To preface, this took place in the Olympic Peninsula along the Hood Canal. My girlfriend's parents recently bought a beautiful riverfront property in a rural area, down a private gravel road that has a few other houses here and there. Their property is heavily forested on all sides, though the neighbors' houses are vaguely visible to both the left and right. The night, though, was winding down after watching a movie. Everyone had gone to sleep while I lay awake playing on my phone. The windows were open, letting in the pleasant sound of the river bubbling outside, and around close to midnight, I would say, I started hearing splashing in the river, which startled my dog but was easily explainable as elk or deer crossing the river since the area is pretty wild. However, after the splashing subsided, I started hearing a repeated animal cry that sounded like a sort of bellow fixed with a scream or a yell. It's hard to remember exactly at this point in time, but it was deep, not like a cougar or fox screaming, and also fast in cadence. Definitely odd, but still explainable as an animal. This happened for maybe 10 minutes or so, intermittently with what sounded like a huffing or a snorting sound. I was alert at this point, listening and trying to calm my dog, who was unsettled by the sound as well. As I listened, it started moving closer. At first it sounded like it was across the river, but now on the right side of the house. But as it moved closer, it just suddenly transformed into what sounded like a human screaming help in the most deranged and unsettling way possible. Like it was screaming help but couldn't quite form or enunciate the words correctly. It literally gives me goosebumps thinking about it right now. At this point, I was just thinking, what the heck is that? And woke up my girlfriend. We listened together in silence and rushed to wake up her parents when we both heard a pronounced help in the scream this time. Both dogs started going ballistic and the screaming stopped at some point in the commotion. So her parents didn't get a good grasp on the sound. After shining flashlights out the windows, we went downstairs and made sure that all the doors and all the windows were locked. After a sleepless night, we woke up and walked the perimeter of the property and found no sign of animals or humans. Quite honestly too, I was half expecting to see bloody human remains or something with how intense the screams were. I imagine that that's what a person being axe murdered might sound like, in fact. But at this point, I really regret not going outside, armed, to investigate, as I've spent the past 2 days constantly racking my brain, trying to figure out exactly what the heck that was. I've been looking into every animal sound out there, and I haven't found a single thing that actually sounds similar to what we heard that night. I'd probably think that I would have imagined the whole thing if my girlfriend wouldn't have heard it as well. I would love to hear any thoughts or any similar experiences from this community, because I am just definitely a little bit rattled. This started around 5 years ago, shortly after my youngest turned 1. I've always been sensitive, I guess, but this had started to frighten me. One night, I was getting ready to put my youngest to bed. He had fallen asleep on the couch at some point. We kept all the bedroom doors closed at that time, as he was walking and had already brained himself on the door multiple times trying to close it. I had picked him up and asked my middle, 3-year-old male at the time, to please open the door for me. As I waited for him to come into the hall, I watched as the bedroom door clicked open and swung into the room. I had frozen in shock and only snapped out of it when my middle had asked why I asked him to open the door that was already open. I had shrugged the question off at the time, telling him that I was sorry, I forgot I had already opened it. No door in my house just swings open like that though. It stays exactly where you leave it. When I told my husband, he brushed it off saying that I must have imagined it, or there was a breeze that pushed it open or something. The next day though, I tested it, wanting to be sure what I saw. I left it cracked open and carried my youngest back into the same area, and the door didn't move this time. I opened the windows and the door still didn't move. Over the last 5 years, I've seen and heard many things happening in my house. I would be happy to share these at some point, but as no one else sees or hears it, they always brush it off and tell me that I'm imagining things. That is, until this last week. I had given up trying to explain what I was seeing and hearing to my family, as they didn't believe me. I had gone to take a shower and my husband was watching a movie and eating ice cream with the kids. The lights were off because, well, you can't really have a movie night in a lit room, right? When my daughter came back from putting her bowl into the kitchen, she sat down next to her dad, and as soon as she pulled her feet onto the couch, the lamp in the corner of the room turned on. My husband, being the skeptical man that he is, thought that it was my middle child. He asks if he was behind the couch, and seconds later, he walks into the room from the kitchen. Now, this lamp is a crank lamp. You have to really turn the dial for it to light up like that. I had turned it off before getting into the shower, as I knew that they would start the movie without me. And when I left the bathroom, my husband looks at me and says, "I think you were right about the ghost." He pulled up the security camera footage, and you can clearly see the light turn on. You can hear him ask for my middle child and see him enter the room a few seconds later too. Now I feel a bit smug that I'll no longer be called crazy, but the activity has picked up quite a bit in the last year and has started to make me feel a bit uneasy, especially since my youngest has started seeing the same figure that I see in his bedroom. This was when my sister and I were younger, her being 8 and I being 10. We used to live in a 2-bed, 2-bath apartment. I remember always feeling uneasy and just seeing things from the corner of my eye. We watched a lot of Ghost Whisperer, a family of 3 back then as well. And well, one night I remember abruptly waking up from my sleep and shooting straight up in bed. It took some time for my eyes to adjust, but I vividly remember seeing this all-white figure. It was shaped like a woman and was a bit transparent as well, and from what I could tell, she wore an old Victorian-style dress, the ones that they made that made the bud more pronounced, and she held an umbrella that looked to have had lace on the trimmings. It was such a vivid sight that I still think about it every now and then. Anyway, I see her gliding to my sister's part of the bed, and she had bent down so slowly that it almost was barely noticeable at first. Eventually, though, she was face to face with my sleeping sister. I remember, though, fixating on her empty face, like there was nothing where there should have been a face. As I'm trying to find even a slight facial feature, I just felt like she wasn't even looking at my sister at that point, but me. She stayed in that position, not budging even the slightest. I remember feeling panicked, almost like I wasn't supposed to witness what I had seen. I remember feeling as if time had stopped whilst I was trying my best to go unnoticed in laying back down. And once I was, I immediately pulled the covers over my head, just in case she planned to be face to face with me as well. I didn't want to wake up seeing that. Once the morning came around, I wanted to ask my sister if she heard or saw anything the night before. I was really conflicted with her being so young. I didn't want to scare her, but I just had to know. I said something along the lines of, "Did you wake up in the middle of the night too?" And I kid you not, she told me that she was scared to tell me that there was a woman who was just staring at me. I had asked her to describe the woman, and she gave me the same description. All white, puffy sort of dress with an umbrella, and of course, no face. I had asked her to tell me as much as she remembered, and she told me that she woke up, shooting straight up in bed, and looking on my side, she saw the woman already bent down face to face with me. She said that she felt like the woman was nice though, because she felt like it had no harm for me or her, so she simply turned over and went back to sleep. Of course, I was freaked out by what my 8-year-old sister had just told me, because up until then, I was really thinking that it was because of the ghost shows that we constantly watched together. We spoke about it a while ago, and she says that she still remembers how she looks as well. It's something that I don't think either of us will ever forget. This happened back in 2020. I'm a female and was 19 at the time, and my mum used to be a baker. She needed some chocolates for decoration or something. Since my siblings were asleep, My mum asked me to go and get some from the nearby shop. As it was close by, I thought that I would just walk. Most of the shops that I went to were closed due to an ongoing strike. Unfortunately, I was unaware of it, and the ones that were open didn't have the brand of chocolate that my mum wanted. Due to the strike, the place looked a bit like a ghost town, with not a soul in sight. I was determined to get that chocolate though, so I walked a bit farther, but still had no luck. Finally, in the end, I decided to head home. I could reach home either by a long route or a short one. Since the short route includes trespassing through the neighbor's property, I chose the long one instead, mainly because I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to them. Anyway, as I was walking, a van with two men passed me and stopped right in the middle of the road, a couple of meters ahead of me. I didn't think too much of it because I assumed that they might be lost and looking for directions. Suddenly though, the man sitting in the passenger seat stuck his head out of the window, turned back and looked at me. His gaze moved in a way that he examined me from head to toe. He then gave me a creepy smile and sat back. I immediately thought to myself, why did he look at me so weirdly? But since it seemed physically harmless, I brushed it off and I just continued walking. Now, the back of the van had this sort of large see-through window, which I could see both men talking to each other right after the creepy gesture from. As I was about to reach the back of the van, the driver did the exact same thing as the guy in the passenger seat. He stuck his head out, turned back to look at me, and sat back, all while smiling creepily. That's when my alarm bells started to ring and I quickly moved away from there. Fortunately, this happened right beside the short route. I immediately changed my direction and started walking towards the short route, which was a narrow path. At some point between this moment and reaching the short path, I heard the back door van open and I looked back and saw that one of them seemed to be about to get out and was now poised at the door, seemingly ready to chase me. As soon as they noticed me taking a different route though, they quickly closed the door and then they suddenly sped off. I was quite shaken up by this, especially by the fact that they sped off at the very moment that I took the short route. I cannot be sure about exactly what that was all about, but considering the area looked pretty deserted and me being a pretty skinny person, I definitely would have been an easy target for abduction or something worse. I'll never forget the way that they looked at me. It was honestly as if it was a predator was eyeing off its prey. When my dad first told me this story as a kid, it gave me chills. Before going into the details, I'll give some context to set the setting and background of the incident. Bear with me too, it will all add up to the scary element of the story. So back in 1985, my 19-year-old dad was serving in the Greek Army Special Forces in the Paratrooper Division. Kind of irrelevant, but I'm a proud son, so I thought that I'd mention it. Army service in Greece is mandatory for every male that has reached their 18th birthday, and so everyone has to go. Military camps where each company is stationed at are mostly positioned in the countryside, and usually there isn't much going on near and around the camp, but they are fairly secluded. Closest town to my pop's camp was like 3 kilometers away. So one night, while serving, it was my dad's turn to go on guard duty in the camp that he was posted in. Every night, 5 to 6 soldiers were selected for guard duty, and they slept in the same barracks. Half hour before it was time for the previous guards to be relieved, another soldier would come into the room, wake up the new batch so that they would get ready and go to their positions. Each shift was 2 hours. The 12 to 6 a.m. shifts were the worst according to my pops. It gets extremely cold in the winter, and you're half asleep standing beside your booth, freezing your butt off while keeping watch. Only way to be vigilant and keep warm is if you take a few steps up and down constantly. So, it was 2 a.m. and my dad was standing next to his booth with his M1 Grand rifle. A Greek army used World War II weapons in the 80s. Absolute silence at this point. He could only hear the wind. He mentioned that the moon was helpful with visibility, but there's only so much you can make out at night, even with the moon, apart from dark shadows, especially at longer distances. There were some tree lines far away, but there wasn't much vegetation around the camp at all. It was more like a clearing, I guess. Everything is going well, like every other night, until a tall dark mass appears from the path coming out of the tree line, and it's headed right towards my father's booth. My dad's heart starts pumping when he spots it, and he's pretty scared at this point. The mass moves slow but steady and is closing the distance, but almost like floating with big slow steps. My dad does what he is instructed to do, and what every guard does in a situation like this. He raises his rifle, aims and screams, "Halt! Identify yourself." There's no reply. The shadow continues to approach. Second time, "Halt! Identify yourself," but nothing. He told me at this point that he is certain that he's seeing a ghost in real life. He says that he thought to himself, "Let's see if a ghost can die." Before he engages, though, he has to scream a code word that raises the alarm. The way that works is the next guard on the next booth that is hundreds of meters away will hear the scream, then scream himself, and with a chain reaction like that, the alarm goes off from booth to booth and reaches patrol. The patrol is an officer with 5 soldiers that make rounds between booths every night and make sure everything is okay with the guards. If you're caught sleeping or away from your post by these guys, well, rest in peace. But they're also the ones to investigate an alarm. The only problem is that the patrol might take a while to get to the booth that raised the alarm, as they don't know which one it is and they might be far away from the right one. Basically, they just run double time through every booth until they locate the original source of the alarm. So my dad hears the other guys screaming and he knows the alarm is raised. He knows that the patrol is going to be there in a few minutes. He also knows that the penalty for falsely raising the alarm is prison. Prison means a soldier gets X amount of days added to their service. The service back then was 2 years plus prison days that have been added to a soldier, along with some penalties. They don't actually lock you up in a cell or anything, unless you commit an actual crime, obviously. Then the military police gets involved. But he doesn't have minutes. The eerie figure is 50 meters away and closing in now. He's getting ready to fire. Then he hears, "Relax, my dad's last name. It's me." Another soldier, covered in a black blanket that my dad knew, was trying to sneak back into the camp at night after having fun in the nearest town without permission. He was holding a bottle of liquor too and was fairly drunk. My dad let him through, but he knew that he was about to get serious amounts of prison time for falsely raising the alarm once the patrol figured out that it was his booth that the alarm was raised from. The patrol gets there. My dad doesn't snitch on the drunk guy. The officer tells him that they'll see each other the next morning. Next day in line, where the penalties are being announced by the officers, my dad is waiting to hear his name called. But in the end, they never mentioned him. Even though an alarm is raised, it's extremely rare to happen that nobody tells him anything. Anyway, it turns out in the end that the patrol officer and the ghost were buddies. The guy sneaking in told the lieutenant what happened and not to mention my dad. The officer apparently pulled some strings and the whole incident was like it never actually happened. But it's scary to think that that guy who was sneaking back like that, one wrong move and he would have been dead, and I really don't know what would have happened to my dad. This is my first time speaking about this, and I'm curious to learn more about my situation. So, when I was 13, I was in a really dark place, cutting, messing with Satanism, etc. I was always suspicious of the information out there on spirituality though, so I never held what I knew to much truth. My family has always had their experiences and abilities. My mum was an empath and could dream about events that would eventually happen. my brother who could see and dream about spirits in the house. I never knew what my thing was, but my mum always warned me about messing with anything evil since I'm an energetic beacon apparently. I didn't listen in the end, and I got a Ouija board for Christmas. I was in terrible depression and was all around the perfect feeding ground for something evil. For a week, nothing was happening though. I was playing alone and kept rushing the process and doing literally everything wrong. Eventually, I tried to actually follow the directions though and call out. I waited for a second after doing this, and the room got absolutely freezing. It sounded like I put AirPods in as well, and put the noise cancelling option on, and heard loud ringing. Suddenly, the planchette moved to yes. It was way more than what I was prepared for, so I freaked out and closed the session without anything but an okay goodbye. And that seemed to tick off whatever was there. It got so cold and the hair on my body immediately stood up. I looked in my mirror across the room and I see this goat-legged figure with wings and squinted eyes lurching towards me, open-armed. I immediately ran out and tried to tell my father and stepmom what happened. They just all laughed and said that I was being ridiculous. The next few days, I really couldn't sleep either. I couldn't eat, I was constantly crying and felt sick to my stomach. My father said that he didn't believe in that type of stuff, but he still made me take the board home to my mother with me, and that was that. My mum, though, immediately felt that something was off. I was too afraid to tell her the truth, so I kept it a secret. That entire week, we all had this strange dream about a woman with an unhinged jaw screaming over us with no sound coming out, waking up at the same time at night, and dogs running from me or hiding under furniture when I entered the room. My mum threw so many things out of the house that had any sort of energy tied to it to get rid of it. After a fight about why I hadn't eaten in a week, I fessed up and brought the board to them and explained everything. My mum wasn't mad, more relieved since she knew how to fix it. From there, she set up a safe environment to exorcise me, poured salt around me and the board, candles, holy water, the whole thing. Everyone left the house except for me and my stepdad. We both held our hands on the planchette and the spirit was already going crazy, trying to move off the board, counting backwards, going to letters, all of it. He kept saying to leave our house and to leave me alone. Eventually it stopped after doing this for 5 or so minutes. In the silence waiting for a sign, my stomach rumbled so loud. I suddenly felt a type of hunger that I'd never felt before, and devoured an entire large stuffed crust pizza. My stomach looked disgustingly bloated for my 13-year-old body, because I hadn't eaten in almost 2 weeks at this point. But since then, I've never felt the same. My mother said that the entire week she couldn't feel my presence, like I was muted. And I know it sounds weird, but I've always wondered if it sort of ate a part of me or something, or if it still follows me around even. Since that incident, I threw out all of my creepy things or anything that reminded me of that incident. I converted to Wicca and have been consistently practicing purification rituals and clean energy practice. Still though, when I'm really depressed, I always see a shadow figure in the corner of my eye or in the corner of a dark room. It could be my paranoia, I admit that, but still, a part of me thinks differently. But what do you guys think? Have you had any similar instances or insight to something like this? If you have, then I would love to know. So back in 2013 to 2014, I basically lived by myself. I was 14 at the time, but both parents were alcoholics. Dad was on the other side of town with a 1-bed apartment, and Mum was always with her boyfriend. That being said, most of the time I'd have a friend come to sleep over with me, since I don't really do well being alone at night. It just always made me feel uneasy, I guess. This particular house that we had moved into, we'd been living there for about 4 months. My brother and mum went together on the lease, but he ended up missing his fiancée and ultimately decided to just help mum pay half the rent and come and go as he needed to. He was a night shift nurse and his schedule was all over the place. Anyway, my friend, her name was Mandy, lived in the neighborhood, which made it easier for her to come and stay. We'd take turns at each other's houses, and one night, Mandy and we were doing some hood rat stuff. We were at our neighborhood park hanging out with my boyfriend at the time, Alan, and some dude that she wanted to hook up with, which she did in the park bathroom on the floor while I awkwardly sat on the bleachers like 3 feet away from Alan because we had only been dating for like 2 months. After she did her deed, we walked back to my house though. Probably about 30 to 45 minute walk or so. We didn't get there until about 3 a.m. My brother was working that night, so we decided that we'd take over his bed instead of my terrible futon that would flip if more than one person was on it. Mandy and I were laying there and I heard her whisper something. I looked over at her and said, "What?" And her eyes were wide. She then said, "I didn't say anything. You just whispered in my ear and you're freaking me out." I started laughing because for some reason that's my reaction to situations that scare me, I guess. "Mandy, I swear to you that I didn't whisper in your ear. You're just trying to freak me out, dude. It's not funny." She jumped up and grabbed her charger and her phone and started saying that she was really scared by that and asked if we could switch rooms. So we get our stuff and we go out to my mum's room across the hall. She plugs her phone in and starts calling our mutual friend MJ. She starts telling MJ how freaked out she was by what happened. And this next part is what made me absolutely terrified. As she's explaining the story to MJ, we suddenly hear footsteps that sounded like heavy work boots, and we had hardwood floors in that house, so you could definitely hear it more pronounced. The footsteps started at the far end of the hallway and made their way to my mum's door. Mandy and I were so scared that we couldn't even talk. We just looked at each other and then looked at my mum's door, waiting for someone to start banging on it or open it or whatever. I tried to rationalize and tell myself that it was my brother because he always wore boots even if he wasn't working. But I peeked out the blind since my mum's window was right in front of the driveway, and his car wasn't out there. We hear 2 more steps, kind of like it went to my brother's room. I told Mandy that we probably needed to call 911 since somebody was in the house, but then it clicked. I had triple-checked the back door and the front door to make sure that they were locked, all the windows and the screen door as well. The screen door was metal and it had a sort of loose panel on the bottom, so it was pretty loud when anyone opened it. And it clicked that I didn't hear the screen door, the squeaky front door, or the back door. After about 10 to 15 minutes, we got the courage to go out and look. And when we did, nothing was out of the ordinary and every door and window was definitely locked. I cannot describe the fear that I felt that night though, not knowing if somebody was about to burst your door open and murder you and your friend. Ever since that night, Mandy refused to come back as well, and honestly, I really can't say that I blame her. I have other stories from this same house, but this one's already pretty long, so it'll have to do, and I'll tell you guys some more another time. But thanks for listening. So something really creepy happened to me yesterday. I'm still processing it because I really don't know what to think about it. But before I get to it, here's a little bit of context. So I live in Ireland, pretty peaceful country. Recently moved from Galway to Dublin. I moved to North Dublin, which is the rougher part, but it's still not too bad. I lived with my family outside the city, could be considered the countryside, I guess. But the area is pretty rural. It's just houses and farms, pretty much, with no shops or stations nearby. Mind you, there are a lot of houses around, but we're all distant as we have big gardens. But there are no sidewalks, and the road is pretty narrow and worn out. And it's rare to see cars, so it's fine to go on the road. Now, I was going on my daily 2K run. Usually I go at around 6 p.m, but yesterday I had some studying to do and I went out at around 9 p.m. It was pretty dark by this point. Now, imagine on the left that there will be a house that's lived in, lights on. Then on the right you'll see a field or a farm. Then you'll see an abandoned building right beside, and then an area of trees for like 200 meters or so. This is pretty much the whole road. Not abandoned by any means, but creepy enough to scare me at night. Anyways, I usually listen to music on my run, with the volume all the way up so that I can't really hear anything. I reach the area with the patch of trees. It's basically pitch black, the lights don't work properly. Occasionally they turn on and sort of flicker back off. I need to use a flashlight to navigate at this point. A song from West Side Story is blasting on my headphones and I'm just sort of vibing. And then the lights flicker back on, so that's good. But that's when it hits me. There's a figure standing around 30 meters away, like 20 meters from the road and the trees. First I thought that maybe I was seeing stuff, but no. He was just standing still, not moving at all. I'm sort of creeped out, so I just keep running. I turn down the volume of the music just in case to hear the figure move, so I can make a run for it if I need to. I speed up, past the figure. I still don't turn up my music. And after around maybe 100 meters away, I turn up the music and try to process what had just happened. Maybe I was seeing things because it was pretty dark. At this point, I'm pretty much long gone. However, I still have to come back home, and usually I walk back the distance that I ran, so basically I run 2Ks and walk back 2Ks. Again, I came to that spot. This time the lights are flickering, but they're almost staying on, I guess. I try to observe the spot where the figure was standing, but I see nothing. At this point, I'm pretty creeped out. I turn off the music and start to run past that spot because I'm a little bit scared. And then suddenly, a man jumps across the street right in front of me. It looks like the same figure. I come to a halt for a second. I'm shocked, and then he starts moving, so I turn around and I start running as fast as I can. While I'm doing this, I start screaming for help, literally screaming as loud as I can while running. I eventually passed the trees and went to the area with the houses. Someone heard me screaming and came out asking me if everything was okay, so I stopped running and realized that the guy, whoever he was, is gone. I explain everything to the man. At this point, I'm extremely creeped out and scared. I still need to get back home, but my parents aren't home. They went over to a friend's house, so I'm left home alone. I asked the stranger for a lift because I'm not going back there ever again. Thankfully, the stranger isn't a big old creep, and he kindly escorts me back home. I lock all the doors and check everything to make sure that I'm safe. Shortly after, my parents arrive, but I don't tell them anything because I don't want to worry them. I haven't gone out for a run today because, well, I'm genuinely scared. I'm terrified thinking about what would have happened if I was too tired to run and he caught me. I'll update you guys if anything happens. I don't think anything else will happen though, hopefully, but I'll definitely be keeping my ear to the ground and listening out for any stories too. Because who knows, maybe this isn't the first time. This happened to me probably about 6 years ago now. To set the scene too, I was camping with about 5 other friends along the South Holston River in the Appalachian Mountains of East Tennessee. It was probably around 2 in the morning when this happened. Me and one of my friends, we slept in a couple of hammocks, while the rest of the group was split up into a couple of tents that were maybe 15 feet away. I was the only one awake at that time, but I was just about to fall asleep when suddenly I hear this insane noise. It sounded like a man letting out a loud, deep scream at the top of his lungs, as if he was in pain. At first, it sounded about 20 feet away, but I heard it move extremely quickly through the middle of the campsite, right between where I was sleeping and where my friends in the tents were. It was just a few feet from me as it went by. Once it passed through the camp, the noise just stopped. It only lasted maybe 3 to 4 seconds. Also, despite the fact that whatever making the noise was clearly moving through the camp very quickly, there was no sound of hurried footsteps, leaves crunching, or anything like that to indicate that something was actually there moving. It was really only the sound of screaming. Whatever it was, it woke everyone up and we were all pretty terrified, having no idea what it was. We all got up at this point and looked around camp, but there was no sign of anything passing through. We thought that maybe it was a type of bird since there were no footsteps, but none of us have been able to find any bird from the area that makes anywhere near the sound that we heard that night. Our first theory was a screeching owl, but we looked up what their calls sound like, and it definitely wasn't one of those. We all agreed that it sounded like a man, but it was way too fast for a person. We thought maybe something like a deer, a bear, or a mountain lion, but we would have undoubtedly heard some footsteps if it was. We're completely out of theories at this point, and we have no idea what to think about it, which is why I'm here. Does anyone have any thoughts on what could possibly explain what we heard? So this happened on 2 occasions in a sort of vice versa way. The first time was from my dad's perspective, and the second time from mine. It all happened when I was in high school, so about 6 years ago. My dad and I would get home and would sometimes get home at around the same time if I didn't have cheerleading practice, but it wasn't often. This time my dad had made it home first and inherently knew that he was the only one home because my car was not there yet. He recalls doing as he normally would when he got home. Usually this entails going out to our first floor bathroom, and he was in there when he says that he heard me come through the garage door, drop my keys off, unload my lunchbox and grab a snack. He heard me run up the stairs, which is a very distinct sound, only amplified by our older poorly built house, and heard my bedroom door close. He figured that it was me, obviously, and once he got out of the bathroom and walked to the stairs, he called up to me. My bedroom is right by the stairs, but the door is sort of out of sight if you're looking from the bottom of them. Often, I'm able to talk to someone downstairs from my bedroom, which is why when he heard me respond to him, it was normal for me to have my door closed and not to have to peek out. He said that he asked me if I had practice later, to which my voice responded, "No, I do not." Now, the stairs are sort of set up where the end is right by the garage door, and as he stood there and listened to me respond, I suddenly walked in behind through the garage door. I came in and my dad was instantly pale-faced and asked me if I had come in earlier. I said no because obviously I hadn't, and he said, "But I was just talking to you upstairs." We go upstairs and my door is open, and obviously nobody is there. Now, the second time we experienced this, I was the first one home and heard him come through the garage door and go straight to the bathroom. I was in my room at the time, sitting on my bed, so I was going off of what I was hearing rather than seeing, the same as he had done before. Needless to say, I called down to him saying hello, and he said hello back before I heard the sound of the garage door open and close. I really thought nothing of it at the time, but got up to sit at my desk, which was facing the window. I found his car not in the driveway, which was odd. There's no way that he could fit his car in the garage itself, as it's a work van. I look around to make sure that he didn't park on the street somewhere. I texted my dad asking if he was home yet, and he said no, not yet, and that he was almost there. I waited till he got home, and I didn't leave my room, and I told him about what had happened. Now, originally one would think that somebody else was in our house, like an intruder or whatever, except in order to be coming in from the garage into the house, they would have had to have reopened the garage door that I had just closed. We had a garage door app at that time and have multiple security cameras, which I checked what time I closed the garage door and the time that I arrived home via the cameras, and it was the same. The door hadn't been opened since, and looking at the cameras, no one had walked anywhere near our property. My entire life I had a debilitating fear that someone would break into our house when I was home alone. Hence the cameras, the garage door, and other security measures. But this spooked me for a long time. But when my dad and I connected our two stories, I came to realize that it may have been something a little more paranormal than crime. So I, a 25-year-old female, have a husky that I walk around my quiet neighborhood and brush outside for obvious reasons. Yesterday, around 3 p.m., I'm standing in my front driveway brushing my dog when I turn around to see a complete stranger, a grown man, standing behind me. He begins by asking me if he can say hi to my dog because he's seen me around a lot. And already I'm hesitant, but I allow it. At this time, I notice that he's on FaceTime with his phone pointing at me too. Then he tells me that he just moved here from South Africa and bought the house at the end of the road. That's been abandoned for like over a year now and was never posted for sale. He starts asking me if I'm 16 because he likes 16-year-olds, following up with, "Are you alone right now? Is this your house? Is this your car? Do you live alone? Are you around often?" etc. I politely say that I'm not willing to answer questions like that and tell him that he should leave at this point. He then walks into the woods across the street, coming back 15 minutes later, attempting to invite himself into my house and asking more questions this time, along the lines of, "Do you lock your doors, and are you alone at nighttime?" Getting upset with me for saying that I do not want him on my property, and I would be calling our cop neighbor to come outside if he didn't leave me alone. He stood in the street, watching me walk into the house and lock up before walking away back to that abandoned house. Now I'm just left thinking if I'm overreacting or if being totally creeped out is the correct response. I've put in a report and spoken to a couple of neighbors, but none of them have seen him around, which I guess is good. But anyway, if you guys have any advice or if you think that I should be a bit more concerned, then please do let me know, because this is the first time that anything like this has ever happened to me. So this occurred a bit over a year ago now. Me and my girlfriend decided to have a date night at the beach, figuring that there'd be less people if we were there during the evening hours and it'd be cooler out. Important to note too is that we're both young women, 20 female and 23 female, but I in particular have a younger looking face. So we came with our bathing suits, found a quiet area away from everyone, and put down our towel to hold hands and look at the stars and waves. It was a super nice time too until, well, the creep approached. Dude approached us from the direction of the general entrance area, looked about mid-30s. I'm going to try and paraphrase too here a bit, but he said something along the lines of, "Hey, me and my family are new to this area. My wife and my 4-year-old daughter want to sit with someone so we can be a little less lonely and make some friends. Can we sit with you guys?" It was weird vibes immediately. It was like 9:30 p.m. at this point, and we were distance away from people already hanging out here. Who would bring a 4-year-old out to a beach this late anyway? Why would you want to sit with some strangers, and why would a family choose to hang out with some college-aged women? This was clearly just made-up stuff, and also, of course, no woman and child matching that description was in sight. My girlfriend and I, we politely declined, but he becomes more and more insistent and animated. I start to panic and fumble for my pepper spray in my tote bag. I was nervous and trying to be discreet, but it took an agonizing amount of time to find it at the bottom of our towels. Somehow he didn't notice, and once I had it clutched, we got a little more bold, trying to get him to go. Girlfriend lies and says that we're underage. The guy gets visibly mad at this and says, "No, you're not." I respond, spray in hand, "Dude, you need to leave." And the look that he gave us was the absolute scariest thing. He took a step back and looked at both of us like he was sizing us up. Then he goes, "You guys are liars," and wanders away. We watch him, and the dude does not return to a wife and kid. Me and my girlfriend go back to our car ASAP, and we called the police. The sketchy vibe was unreal, and we gave them his description, and we just took off. As far as we know, nothing ever came of it, and the question that we still have is, what was this dude trying to do? He wasn't under the influence as far as we could tell, and his story seemed so rehearsed. But we still theorize on what his plan was, and neither of us came to reach a conclusion about what could have happened that night. And I'm sharing this because I would like your thoughts and theories. What do you think he was up to? This story occurred a few years back now, while I was staying at my grandparents' house during vacation. They lived near the Atlantic Wall, the system of concrete blockhouses built by Nazi Germany during World War II. At the time, I was 16 and fascinated with urbex, so I thought that it would be a great idea to go and explore those. When I arrived on the beach, I started exploring and everything went well, since this place is actually public and a lot of people come here like you would do any normal beach, I guess. Time passed by and there was nothing really interesting to see, so I made the decision to go deep into the dunes to find other structures. I found some, but they were all sort of buried in the sand or covered with vegetation, until I found this one. I was super excited, and when I arrived, I started to barge in just like I did before. But suddenly, a gut feeling stopped me at one of the entrances. I kept quiet and listened. There was this sort of, like indistinct chatter or moaning. Honestly, I don't know what kept me around after that, but for some stupid reason, I chose the option of yelling, "Hello, is anyone there?" multiple times. The sounds coming from inside stopped, and the atmosphere was getting quite tense, so I made my way to the roof. It was a single ramp, no exit. Stupid decision again, but curiosity was too strong. A few minutes later, a middle-aged man comes out and started the weirdest discussion with me. He asked me if I was alone and what my age was. I was obviously a minor. Then proceeded to tell me that what they were doing inside was perfectly right and I shouldn't call the police, without waiting for my answers. At the end of his little speech, he asked me if I wanted to go inside. Obviously, I refused. Thank God he didn't insist and went back in. As I went away, I passed by one of the other entrances that happened to provide a direct view of the inside. I took a peek and instantly ran the heck out of there. What I briefly saw was another old man, naked, playing with himself, looking at me. In the background, I saw many other figures and candles on the ground. I heard some sort of chanting too. After I put enough distance, I took my phone out and called the police. What I told them was just too surreal for them to believe me, and I was basically laughed at and given a lecture about prank calls. And no one believes me other than my dad. He had weird encounters in those dunes as well. I don't know what kind of stuff in a bunker trying to lure miners in that was, but after that, I quit urbex. Also, I never thought of it, but I actually just found an article online related to this. Basically, the beach that I went to is right next to a nudist beach. I must have crossed the border by going into the dunes without realizing it, but Over the past 40 years, the beach was about to be closed multiple times since libertines see an opportunity to go there and have sex. Many of them cause disruption since it's completely illegal to do that. Plus, the dunes are a protected environment, so it's actually forbidden to go there. And after I just had a chat with my grandma, she says that police went there many times already to make them leave, but it doesn't stop them from going back. Ironically, too, the article mentioned the raising concerns about the situation lasting exactly from the same period this happened to me. And well, those guys that I met are very extreme libertines, apparently. And some suggested that I go back there with friends to collect evidence, but I have to wait till next summer. Plus, confronting these people really doesn't seem like a good idea to me. Also, just to be clear, the article is not about a sex cult or anything wicked like that. It simply mentions the conflict between naturists and libertines who come on this beach to get it on and whatnot, and how the authorities want to close the beach regarding that, and that was pretty much it. It was a coincidence supporting my story, but not about my story, if you get my drift. Anyway, like I said, after this, I quit Urbex, and maybe I'll go back at some point and have a look around, but I won't be doing it alone this time. That's for sure. A few years back, I was living with my aunt and uncle after moving to a new state. They had just moved into a new home in a new subdevelopment. In this area, door-to-door salesmen swarm new developments and new buildings for water softeners, cleaning supplies, solar panels, generators, and the Kirby vacuum people. They wandered the neighborhood all day knocking on doors, but were usually gone by around 5 p.m. This particular evening, I was home alone with my dog, a mutt who was mostly black lab and an unknown mixture. He was roughly the size and weight of a full-breed Labrador, but he had a sort of stockier build and long wiry hair. He was a gentle, sweet baby who was upset if someone spoke harshly to him. I'd never known him to be threatening to anyone. My aunt and uncle were out celebrating their anniversary. This time of year, the days were getting longer, and we would have full dark by around 8 p.m. It was around 7 p.m. and starting to get dusky when someone rang the doorbell and knocked on the door. The door was one with those sort of thick glass over windows, and I could see the door and who was there from the kitchen. I was going to ignore them, but unfortunately they could see me and continued to knock, so I went to answer the door. The dog followed me, but stood off to the side in the shadows of the dining room. The person at the door was a young man, about college age, dressed in a collared shirt and tie and khakis. I looked a bit like a Mormon missionary with style, I guess you could say. He was thin and about my height, 5'8", 5'9". I figured he was a salesman of some sort, but thought that it was a bit odd that he was out this late in the day. I thought that I'd open the door a crack, tell him that I'm not interested, and then just lock the door. So I opened the door a few inches to speak through it, and he starts his spiel about Kirby vacuum cleaners and he wants to come in and give a demo and all that. But one, it's not my house, and two, I know once they get in that they aren't leaving without selling something, and I have no need for an overpriced vacuum, and I don't have $1,000+ to spend anyway. So I tell him no thank you, I'm not interested, and begin to close the door when he puts his foot between the door and the door jamb and throws his hands up to stop the door from closing. This is when I think, what the heck? And I hear a vicious growling behind me to my right, and then a loud deep barking as my dog lunges for the door. I grab his collar to keep him from going out the door, and the guy's mouth drops open. His eyes get really wide, and he looks like he's ready to pass out or pee himself as he jumps back from the door and backs away saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, wrong house, and then turns and runs to the end of the driveway where a car with 3 men in it pulls up to get him, allegedly, and they speed off, tires squealing. I told my aunt and uncle about it when they got home, and we told a few neighbours so that they could keep an eye out for unusual behaviour. It's possible that they were a team of Kirby salesmen, I suppose. They do travel in teams of 4 sometimes and follow the door knockers in the car with the vacuum, but I was suspicious because it was late in the day for them to be knocking on doors, and it was a team of 4 men. Usually they have a team with 2 or more women in the group because they're knocking on doors at a time of day when women are going to be home alone and unlikely to let strange men in. So, I still don't know if it was a team of Kirby salesmen or not, but something tells me that it wasn't. And I'm sure glad that my dog was there with me that day to save my butt. So one summer, I was traveling in East Africa. I was fairly young and hadn't even finished high school, but I was with a small group of people who were about my age. Our group had 2 trip leaders who stayed with us the whole time, in addition to local guides who accompanied us for different legs of the trip. During the trip, we went to Serengeti National Park to spend a few days going on safaris. Following our first day of safaris, it was time to go to site where we would be sleeping. We arrived at the site, which was in the middle of the national park, in the evening, and I was quite surprised to see that the only things there were basic camping tents and an outhouse. I'd been on safaris before, but we stayed in actual buildings, so this was a bit unexpected. Anyway, night finally comes and it's time for everyone to go to bed. Our group was split up by gender. The girls were in one tent and guys in another, with trip leaders and local guides in their own. There was only one other guy my age on the trip, so it was just me and him sharing a tent to ourselves. The outhouse was away from the tent, about 50 meters or so. It smelled horrible, so nobody wanted to sleep next to it. Our local guides instructed us to always go to the outhouse in pairs because of the dangerous wildlife in the park, which we were camping right in the middle of. I assumed that this was a standard precautionary warning that they'd issued as a just in case. But about halfway through the night, I suddenly was desperate to take a pee. I didn't want to wake up the other guy in my tent to go to the outhouse, so I decided to just pee right behind our tent by myself. So I grabbed my headlamp, put on my shoes, and I head outside. As I'm peeing, I hear something on the ground nearby crack, though. It couldn't have been more than 10 meters away, and I instantly turned my head to shine my dull headlamp in that direction, which illuminates 2 pairs of eyes that are intensely staring right back at me. If you don't know, animal eyes have a reflection when you shine a light on them at night, and I was completely paralyzed by how close these creatures were to me, how still they were being. We stared at each other for 10 to 15 seconds before I decided to hurry back into the tent and tried to fall back to sleep. The next morning, as our whole group is eating breakfast, the girls start talking about how something brushed up against their tent in the night and scared them half to death. I tell them about the 2 pairs of eyes that were staring at me and how it scared me too, when one of our local guides chimes in to say that it was just hyenas and that there's nothing to be afraid of since they're scared of humans. This calms the group down a bit. I deer hunt a bit though, so I knew that different animals reflect different colors when you shine a light at their eyes. So I asked the guide what color hyena eyes reflect, and he said blue. I told him that the eyes that I saw were gold and asked what animal reflects that color. He seems a bit shocked by that, but replies that the only animal that could have been was apparently lions. When my daughter was 2, I was having a really tough time as a single mother, and so I decided to take a road trip up Highway 1. I made reservations in Trinidad at a cool cabin in the woods within walking distance of the beach. Before I left, my stepfather gave me a loaded .38 revolver, which I stored under the driver's seat. Sometime after driving through San Francisco, it was very late and dark and nobody was on the highway. My daughter was sleeping peacefully in her car seat next to me. Back then, we could legally have car seats in the front. I noticed a car, though, coming up behind me and passed but then sort of slowed down, driving alongside of me. I sped up and slowed down, but I just couldn't shake him. I looked over and this guy had his interior light on and was furiously gesturing for me to pull over. I knew that I had to find a safe place. There was nobody else on the road and I was running low on gas. There was just nothing on the highway for miles, but I kept driving and this guy just wouldn't leave me alone. I was getting pretty frightened, but the mama bear was coming out and I was getting very angry as well. I knew that he could see my kid who was still sleeping. Finally, there was an exit up ahead and a gas station in the middle of nowhere, so I took the exit with the guy closely following me. I really wasn't sure what to do. I mean, the gas station was brightly lit, but it had no customers. I didn't feel that it was safe to pull in, so I slowly passed it, drove further into the dark, deserted landscape, and pulled into a large dirt area and drove quite a ways off the highway with him following. There was absolutely nothing around, and I knew that I was in big trouble, and I needed to take control and wanted to put him in a vulnerable situation. Mama Bear was in full protective mode now. So I stopped the car, I grabbed the gun and I jumped out, locking the car behind me. As he pulled up, I ran around to the passenger side and waited. He then got out of his car and quickly moved towards me, and I suddenly held the gun up, visible in the moonlight. He came to a halt, surprised, and then I leveled the gun across the car, taking aim, and waited. He stood there, seemingly weighing his options, and then just turned around, got back in his car, and he left. I think the eeriest thing about this whole thing, though, is that not a single word was spoken the whole time. The whole thing, it totally freaked me out. This occurred around 1999 and 2000. So my best friend and I were avid outdoor adventurers and also amateur pot growers. But we would frequently find secluded places in the woods that allowed for ample light and shade for plants to grow and that would not allow them to be easily found. One particular day, we went to an annex of trails located near a New Jersey State Park trail system. The trails weren't actually in the park, but I had hiked them before and knew that they weren't, frequented that much. We had gone out that day with our seeds, partially sprouted in moist paper towels. We parked the car at the trailhead and we started hiking in. We covered a mile or so and then ventured off the trail and into the woods. We found a clearing, planted the seeds, and tied a few barely visible ribbons off to mark the way to the plant spot to check them in the future. My friend and I got back on the trail and we started walking back to the car, when my friend noticed a man in the other direction just sort of staring at us. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, bald head, normal clothes. We didn't think anything of it for the most part, but we definitely kept looking back as anyone would when someone is behind them in the woods, right? Well, we saw that he was walking 60 plus or so feet behind us. It seemed weird, but it was probably more so due to us having anxiety that we just planted seeds. We picked up the pace, but the man also seemed to pick up the pace as we weren't gaining any distance. At one point, we decided to just get off the trail and let him pass. We turned off the trail and walked into a thicket of sticks and bushes, which I remember vividly getting shredded on. We got deeper into the woods and then we heard cursing. When we turned around, the man was coming through where we entered. It was at that moment that we actually became scared. Mind you, we were two strong 19-year-olds, but a man following you in the woods is pretty darn creepy. We made a kind of U maneuver to sort of outflank him and came out of the woods a bit further down the trail, and once on the trail, we ran. As we were running, there was a fork in the trail and my friend went right and I went left. I realized my mistake as my buddy was going down the correct path and I wasn't. So I turned around and started running back towards the fork to follow my friend. As I was running towards the direction that we came from to get to the fork, I could see the man running towards me down the trail. He was a distance away, but not far enough in my eyes. Survival mode kicked in and I ran as hard as I could. I caught up to my friend who was sort of walking at that point. I screamed, "He's after us," and we both booked it all the way to the car. We got in the car shaking and out of breath. We backed up and started to get out of the parking lot when the man appeared at the trailhead. He stopped there and just sort of stared at us as we finally drove away. Now, I always wonder what all of that was about. Did he want to kill a couple of 19-year-olds there and then? Was he also doing something illegal in those woods and wanted us gone? My buddy and I still laugh and talk about that day 22 years ago. And we also wonder if those seeds ever took root. This one time when I was like 15, I was staying the night at a friend's house and I had this really weird experience. The area is very wooded around the house and there's a good distance between each neighbouring house. We were all in the basement. I was laying on a futon watching my friends play a game, and at some point I wound up falling asleep at around 10 p.m, I believe. But I woke up not even an hour after that to one of my friends frantically trying to wake me up to go upstairs. I asked why, and he told me that someone was outside the house. I rush upstairs to see the friend that lived there with a pistol pointed at the front door. He told me that he was sitting at the dining table when he saw someone peer into the glass part of his front door. He had me stay with his niece on the other side of the house while we waited for his older brother to get home. I was really freaked out, but after his brother had gotten home, it turns out that he had all the security cameras all around the house, and when they checked it, they watched the footage when there was nothing there, not a single sign of someone approaching the home at all. To this day, I still wonder if he was just seeing something or if it was something else entirely that he had actually seen. Weirdly, I've had a lot of situations like this happen with this particular friend, and they always happened when I was asleep, which obviously is very strange. I'll begin this story with a quick note about the home that I grew up in. The home was an old mill home that was moved from one location to where it stands now, and a basement was dug during the construction by my family. The home looks like your normal home, I guess, unless you really look at it, because there's a window above the garage that always seems to give a sort of eerie feeling, like someone was watching me through there. Now, I've never seen anyone standing there, obviously. For some reason, you just cannot rid yourself of that uneasy feeling. Growing up, I had multiple paranormal occurrences. My father raised me and my sister in that home, so she and I had spent plenty of time alone. When I was a younger child, I never slept without a light, TV, or radio on. I needed noises, light, or something to distract me from feeling uneasy and watched. I don't know any other history of my home except that it was moved. I feel like whatever is in that house is unhappy about that fact too. The house almost feels, like cursed in a way. I don't have the same nostalgic sense that people get from seeing or visiting their childhood home. Even today when I visit, I feel uncomfortable still. Anyway, one day I was left alone in my preteen years. I was a fairly responsible kid and I was just playing on the computer while my father was out running some errands. I heard a voice coming through the speakers, which was impossible as the computer was not hooked to the internet, nor was I playing a game that had voices as I was playing solitaire on Windows. Next, I heard heavy, loud footsteps coming from the hallway towards the room that I was in. They sounded a lot like the cowboy boots that my dad always wore. So I said, "Hello, Dad?" But there was no answer. I wasn't freaked out until I peeked out of the room and I didn't see anyone. At that, I ran outside and the truck wasn't there either. I instantly picked up the house phone to call my dad and went hitting the green call button. The phone made a sort of loud screeching sound. I dropped the phone where I stood without hanging up and I ran outside until my dad showed up about 30 minutes later. Of course, I tried to tell him what happened and he replied, "Oh, you probably just picked up a semi-driver's radio on the computer and you're just hearing things." I couldn't believe that he thought that I was making it up, to be honest. So, over the years, I didn't have many problems with the home until I was alone again in my bedroom, studying on my bed, my cat Spock sitting with me on my book. After an hour or so, he suddenly just got up and fluffed up, first standing on edge, staring towards my open closet. He hissed and spat at what seemed like nothing, but then the room got really cold. And I, of course, got up to see what he could have been so frightened of. But nothing was there, nor did I hear anything. That was until I heard whispering outside of my bedroom door.
I quickly swung it open, but again, there was nothing. In the end, I wrote it off as the heater making noise, and I went to bed, or tried to at least. I laid down, lamp still on, when all of a sudden my radio turned itself on. This was an old radio without a remote, so there was no way that it could just turn on without hitting the button. And because of that, I didn't sleep that night. My story picks back up again when I was 18. I lived alone in the house as my father had picked up a job in another state. I had a friend over for the night, and after our movie marathon, we tried to go to bed. As we sat there in the quiet dark, he said, "Do you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. "Those voices. There are people talking." "What?" He shushed me, and as we sat there in the darkness, you could hear two people whispering to each other outside of my bedroom. I got up to investigate, and there was nobody there. "Screw this," he said. I picked up my cell phone to call my dad, and instead of the phone ringing, I got a sort of message saying that the number wasn't in service. That was impossible, I said. So we ran outside, and I drove to a church parking lot. I dialed my dad again, and it went through, but he didn't answer. I called my best friend to ask if we could sleep at her house for the night, and she agreed. That friend spent many nights at my house as a child, and she also felt the unease in my home, and she understood. My last paranormal experience, though, that happened when I moved back into my parents' home after a failed relationship many years later in 2017. I was taking a nap on the couch while my dad was out, and I was woken up by someone whispering in my ear, "Hey." I swung up off the couch, looked around, confused, and I grabbed my cell phone. When I tried to call my dad, it did the exact same screeching sound that the home phone did all those years ago. Again, I just sat outside crying, waiting on him to get home. He still didn't believe what I had experienced, and to this day, he still writes it all off. So I just got back from a family vacation in Mexico. We stayed at a nice western resort, and usually around 9:30 p.m. my family would head back to their rooms to go to sleep. Naturally, as a 25-year-old, I wanted to stay up and party or go drinking at bars, but my older brother was working remotely and wouldn't go out with me. After the family went to bed, I went out to a bar around the corner from my hotel and ended up befriending the locals there, and a 29-year-old guy from San Diego named Luke, who was there for a wedding. We got together and we sort of had a bit of fun. We started hanging out every night, in fact, after my family went to sleep, and on the third night of the trip, Luke asked if I wanted to meet him downtown with his friends. I really wanted to, but I was at an important dinner with the family that went on later than usual. I ended up staying home that night, but the next night I met him at this huge Pablo Escobar-esque mansion they rented on Airbnb, and he told me that it was good that I couldn't make it out the night before because of how scary of an experience it was. He went on to explain to me that the night before, his buddy was taking a pee outside and someone approached him and held out a key with a bump of coke on it. Without thinking, he snorted the bump, and the person who offered it was now demanding that he buy an $80 bag from them. He was drunk and refused while getting pretty aggressive towards them. Things went from bad to worse as the Mexican who offered the bump started following their group from bar to bar for the next 3 hours, taking pictures of them. He called his friends, and there were now a group of them following behind, claiming to be affiliated with the cartel. They warned that if Luke's buddy didn't pay them, they were going to call their boss. Luke eventually went over and tried to smooth things over. They told him that his friends had stolen from them and that it was going to cost him his life if someone didn't pay up. The cartel member also pulled his shirt up, revealing a 9mm pistol at his waistband. Luke did the right thing and remained calm while offering to take them to an ATM and pay out the pocket $160 US so they could be left alone. The cartel members gave him an empty coke bag and abruptly left. Even after him doing all this for his friend's safety, his friend denied any responsibility or wrongdoing, and even had the audacity to blame Luke for trying to help by getting involved. He also didn't offer Luke a single dollar. After this event happened, Luke got robbed again too in the same night with a girl who ripped his $200 gold necklace right off of his neck. And his friend was cool to me, but sounded like a real jerk, I guess, after Luke explained this to me. The poor dude was just trying to be a good friend and was met with no gratitude, only to be robbed again that night. Needless to say, I'm pretty happy that I didn't make it out to meet them that night. I also think things could have gotten a lot worse for them had he not offered the cartel members money. Be careful out there, guys, and obviously never accept free drugs from a stranger on the street in Mexico, or really anywhere, because it always comes with a price. For 12 years, I've worked as an actor for a local haunted house attraction. It's a lot of fun as I get to play a variety of horror characters and act out different scenes. And while the tours that we put on are clearly fake, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that, well, just isn't. I should start off by explaining that the building that we do this out of is extremely old and was once an elementary school. We gutted the section of the building that was classrooms and we constructed it to what we needed. And this is when we actually started having weird experiences. Now, there's plenty of activity that can be just shrugged off, such as feeling watched and hearing footsteps running in areas where no one is. But then there are things that are just not so easy to disregard. Such as one evening, a member was working on hooking up our sound system by himself. He had not even hooked up the large speakers yet when he stated that a large deep growl came booming through them. This terrified him so much that he ran out of the building and just wouldn't go back in, even to look up until another member came down to go in with him. He never worked alone in the building again after that too. It just really shook him to the core. Other activity seems playful and childlike, I guess, such as hearing small giggles and whispering in the halls and in the rooms that are empty, things being moved from where we last placed them. But one year, I was in a rocking chair that I would jump out of as a group came through. The thing about the rocking chair is it was more like a glider and it was sort of broken, and I would have to use a lot of force to get the chair to rock backwards at all. It was right before showtime. I was sitting in this broken chair getting mentally pumped up for the night ahead. I was completely alone when I swear that I felt someone grab onto the back of the chair and harshly pull it backwards. I felt myself flying backwards with the chair, and I honestly thought that I would flip out of it. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and as soon as I stabled myself, I jerked to see who had done this. But the room that I was in was large, and no one could get out of this room without me seeing them running away in the split second that it took me to look behind me, and there was absolutely no one there, and I was suddenly covered in goosebumps. No one was even in the area around my room at the time. Later that same night too, the lights were off, my stove was on, and a group had just left my room when I noticed a small figure in the far right corner of the room. It looked like a small child crouching down looking my way, and I was immediately worried that a child had been left behind from the previous group. As I headed towards the figure to ask if they were okay, the strobe flashed and the figure that I saw was just gone. This same year but different night, I was again sitting in my chair waiting for the next group when someone or something growled right into my ear. It was so loud that it caused my ear to ring, and when I turned to see who was there that could have done this, again, there was nothing but an empty room. I changed rooms the next year and did not experience as much creepy stuff, that's for sure. There's not much history that I've been able to find out about the building too, but I'm really curious as to what could be causing all this weirdness. This is only a tiny bit of what has been experienced over the years too working there, and I don't feel that it'll be stopping anytime soon, so who knows, maybe I'll be back at some stage to tell you guys more. So every morning I wake up at 2 a.m. to let my dog out, and then we get back to sleep together on the recliner. I have neighbors, but they aren't squished right up against my house or anything. There's a sort of field behind my house too, and behind that field there's a few miles of dense woods. So I take my dog out towards the field because he doesn't like doing his business right up against the house. This morning, I hop up and take him out like normal. Leash goes on and I grab my jacket. We walk out towards the field and he starts sniffing around and doing his thing. When out of nowhere, I hear a clear male voice say, "Hi there." I played it off as 2 a.m. groggy brain, but my dog heard it too. His hair shot up all down his back and his tail was tucked. He started looking around and growling. I was instantly freaked out and we hurried back inside. Mind you, I had a flashlight and I saw no one there. There couldn't have been really anyone near me too. It's 2 a.m. and my backyard is fairly large, but there's really nowhere else to go. The field is large too and the grass is about a foot tall, I guess, but the voice sounded like it came from only a few feet away. I still can't wrap my head around it, but I went out at 2 again and didn't hear anything this time. I was on edge the entire time and my poor dog was too. The spot where I take him is right at the edge of my property and the large field, so there's no way anyone was hiding near me or anything. The woods start about 40 yards away from the edge of the field. The only thing near me during this experience was a single tree on my property and the field with 1 foot tall grass. My tree is about maybe 18 foot tall and too skinny for a human to climb up. But I even flashed my light on it after my dog started growling because possums like to sit in it. I have another dog who doesn't like getting up at 2 a.m, so her fat tail will just wait until 6 to go out. Strangely enough, she won't go near the edge of the field anymore too. That's where she did her business, and even in broad daylight she won't go there anymore. Also, I'm going to start recording my dog's nightly bathroom trips because I'd honestly prefer this to never happen again, but if it does, then I want to catch something. And it would put me at ease knowing that I have proof of the event, I guess. I still don't know how to feel about it. I've never really paid attention to anything paranormal. I've only ever had another experience, but it's pretty mundane to be honest. To me, the smaller and rarer the event, I guess the more terrifying it feels, though, when the realization sets in that something actually did happen. And that night, I can say for sure that something weird definitely took place. My boyfriend, male 20, and I, a female 21, live alone and we both work weird hours. He leaves for work at around 10:30 p.m. and I leave at around 4 a.m. It's starting to get cold outside and I drive a 30-year-old Honda, so it takes a while to warm up. Now, one morning I went outside at around 3:45 a.m. to start my car so that it would be warmed up by the time that I was leaving for work. When I went outside to start my car too, there was nobody else outside and no other cars that I could see besides the ones parked in my neighbors' driveways. There was not a car parked in front of my house at all, and then at 4 a.m. it was time for me to leave. I got all my stuff ready and was walking to my car, and as I'm walking I hear a man yell, "Hey." I ignored it because obviously it's 4 in the morning and dark outside and I'm a female, but I noticed his car was parked directly in front of my house, which is honestly weird to me by itself. So then again he yelled, "Hey," but it was a bit louder this time. I still refused to even look in that direction and I pretended that I didn't hear him. He yelled over and over again, "Hey, can I get a jump?" asking me to jump his car. He kept getting louder each time and seemed like he was starting to get frustrated, I guess. At this point, all I was thinking was this guy was not out here 15 minutes ago. How did he suddenly pull up and his car died conveniently right in front of my house, all within 15 minutes? So anyway, I continued to pretend like I didn't hear him, got in my car and immediately locked the doors and left. As I was driving away, I kept my eyes on the mirrors, and when I got about maybe a block and a half away, I saw his car start up and he drove away perfectly fine. It didn't look like he needed a jump at all, in fact. So, why was he asking me for a jump if his car would start up just fine? What would have happened if I actually did try to go and help this guy? I know that I could be overreacting, but To me, the whole situation seemed very suspicious. My grandma always said a man would never ask a woman for help, especially with a car, and my boyfriend said one time that he wouldn't even approach a female at night just for the simple fact that it might make them uncomfortable. I told him what happened, and he said that it was very weird as well. I don't know if it could have been a trafficking tactic, a kidnapping tactic, etc., but it was definitely strange. One of my friends joked that someone could be watching my house, and I get that they were trying to be funny and lighten the mood, but it's definitely kind of scary when you have an experience like that, especially because if someone was watching my house, they would know that I was completely alone for a few hours at night. Anyway, do you guys have any thoughts? I'm still trying to wrap my head around this and figure out if I'm just overreacting or not. This was just a few nights ago, and honestly, I've been kind of scared of going out to my car or just being alone in general at night since then. I guess I'm just wondering if maybe somebody is watching my house. And if they are, what should I do? So this was back about 12 years ago. I was 19 years old, 32 now, and my dumb ass decided that it was a great idea to join the group of people who came to my door to try and sell magazines. I had just gotten out of a relationship and wasn't working, so why not, right? To start, it was shady as heck, but I didn't care. They all partied and made a few bucks to boot. I thought, what could go wrong? I started in New Hampshire, and by the second week was across the country in some hillbilly town in Alabama. I walk up to this woman sitting on her porch, and I try to sell her some magazines. I notice that she's drinking and ask if I could have one. I'm almost done with my sales for the day after all. The woman is about 5'9", I guess, 300 pounds, maybe around age 40 to 50 if I had to guess. I don't think much of it. I mean, it's a woman, I'm a woman, what could go wrong? I walk into a house and I see a huge cage with a wolf in it. Yeah, a wolf growling at me. Still, I'm pretty ballsy, so I don't think much of it. The woman offers me a drink and we small talk, and before I know it, she is in my face accusing me of stealing her wallet. I hadn't left her sight, mind you, but she threatens to let her wolf out. I am literally in shock because I now know that she is a complete psycho. After about 10 minutes of her threatening my life, me crying, saying that I'm not a thief, she then just starts laughing. She says, "How old are you?" I tell her my age. She then goes on to say that this is a life lesson. Don't go into strangers' houses. She apparently knew exactly where her wallet was the whole time. She then tells me to get the heck out of her house and leave this neighborhood and never come back. And all I can say is, well, I guess she had good intentions, but for 10 minutes of my life, I genuinely thought that I was a wolf's dinner and an old hick lady's amusement. So I just recently moved to Oklahoma, and I keep having very uncomfortable experiences outside, especially in the evening or nighttime. It started when I went to go out to put laundry in the wash one day. We have a laundry room attached to our building, and it was broad daylight, so I wasn't exactly feeling nervous about anything. I got about 20 feet from the walkway or alleyway to the washroom, and I smelled the worst rotting animal smell that I've ever smelt in my life. Not only that though, but as soon as I smelt it, I got the strongest flight or fight reaction that I've ever felt. I ran back to my unit, locked the door, and had a sort of small anxiety attack, I guess. I waited about 15 to 20 minutes before going back out, and when I did, there was no smell and I felt normal. Well, fast forward about a week later, my husband and I were outside at 1 a.m. smoking a cigarette when we heard what sounded like a dying dog. We live right off of one of the major interstates, so we assumed an animal must have been hit. We started walking towards the direction of this noise, sort of wheezing and whining, a terribly sad noise. And when we got to the edge of the parking lot, as we got onto the pavement, the wheezing dog noise turned into what sounded like an owl hooting. I understand owls making strange noises. I was raised in Texas after all. I've heard many, but this was not an owl. The longer we listened to it as well, the more it sounded like a person trying to mimic an owl. My husband called out, "Hey, is somebody there?" pretty loudly, and just silence was the response. We stood quiet a few moments before the owl noise completely stopped, and the sound of an unnatural laugh echoed from the trees. Now, the only way that I can describe this noise is it was like when a deaf person laughs. Like they can't hear how they sound, so it just kind of sounds a bit off. I don't mean to sound rude at all by any means, truly. That's just really the only way that I know how to describe sort of what it sounded like. It felt like ice water was in my veins, though, as soon as I heard it. Both of us just felt extreme fear in that moment, and we ran back into the house. And I could explain off all of these things if I hadn't seen what I had seen next. So a few days later, I was outside smoking around 7 p.m, and I saw two men walking on the side of the street where I had heard the noise a few nights prior. They walked past the trees a little ways, but then stopped. It was dusk, so light was low. One of them turned on their phone light and shined it into the trees before sort of jumping back. Both men took off at full sprint away from the tree line. I have no idea what they saw. I didn't hear anything, but there was pure fear there. The most frustrating part, though, was I was looking right at them and I saw absolutely nothing. Fast forward about a week later, though, and I get a text while I'm at work from my husband telling me that he heard our daughter talking and laughing in the field across the street. He was 100% sure it was her until he realized that she was inside of her room. He said, though, that it sounded just like her. Fast forward again a few days later, and I found dried blood on my door jamb, as well as scratches near my doorknob, and more dried blood at the bottom of my door. My neighbor, too, had their internet cables cut and told me that someone had tried to open their door the night that it happened, and then slammed their body against the door trying to break in. My neighbor said that he forced himself out the door ready to confront whoever was there, but when they did, there was no one. Mind you, they had just popped out just after whatever was banging on their door slammed against it, so that just makes no sense. We constantly hear things on the roof too, things in the valley behind our place. Our dog will run to the door at random hours and sniff and growl like somebody is there. I've probably made a mistake by calling out to this thing, whistling at night, trying to sort of antagonize it, I guess, because I desperately want a recording. I have one recording of its noises, and it sounds just like an owl, but towards the end there's this sort of low, inexplicable moan that comes from the same place the owl sounds are coming from. It's hard to hear it and ends very abruptly, so I don't feel like it's good enough. But nobody believes me. But I know something is out there. It knows that I know it too. I feel it sort of watching me. If I curse at it or try and lure it out, it goes completely silent or does that horrible laugh. I can never seem to catch the laugh too, or any of the noises. As soon as I hit record, it usually just stops. I don't know how to explain that too, but I know that I'm not going crazy. Anyway, please, if someone can help me, I really want to know what this thing is. I have pictures of the blood on my door, the scratches, and the video of the owl, or the sounds and the moaning. I just feel like no one would take this seriously, though. It always smells like a corpse when it's around, too, and that's the biggest sign that something just isn't right. I brought it up to one of my native co-workers, and he said, "Leave it be, wash the blood from your door, and stop trying to talk to it." He wouldn't tell me anything else. I don't know if this means that it's a Wendigo or a skinwalker or something else entirely, but I've never felt such, I guess, dread and fear as I do when I hear or smell it out there. Please, anyone, if you know what this is, then please tell me I'm not losing my mind, and if it's real, how do I make it go away? This thing is causing me so much stress, and I've just had enough, and I want this to end. So I'm 20 now, and this took place when I was 13 to 14 years old. I think it's also important that I note that I've always been a bigger, older looking guy. At the time of this story, I was roughly 6'1", 200 pounds, and was in moderately decent shape since it was football season. I guess I just thought since I was such a big guy, nothing could ever happen to me. But this story is about the night that proved me wrong. So one night, I had gotten into an argument with my parents and needed to take a walk to blow off some steam. I had set a route I'd usually take to get to this park located on the other side of my neighborhood. By the time that I arrived at the park, nightfall had fully set in. I made my way to the only lit-up corner of the park, sat down at a bench, and began listening to my music on my phone. I should note that I was completely comfortable dropping my guard, as this was during a time where my relationship with my family was a bit strained, so coming here had become something of a regular occurrence. A few songs in, I noticed a car pull up on the unlit side of the park, which proceeded to immediately turn its headlights off. It was a silver SUV, but I couldn't tell what model or how many people were in the vehicle from where I was sitting. I didn't think much of it at first, as this really wasn't anything out of the ordinary. My neighborhood is rather large and divided into multiple parts, so people would frequently get lost trying to navigate it. I simply assumed that the driver had stopped to pull up directions on their phone or something. But a good nearly 10 minutes would pass and the vehicle still hadn't moved, which began to make me a bit nervous for some reason. The thought crossed my mind that whoever was in that car may be watching me, and as unlikely as that thought seemed, it was enough to get me to leave the park. As I was getting up, the vehicle turned its headlights back on, and at that, a sick feeling formed in my stomach, and I quickly made my way out of the park, breaking my usual route to ensure that I didn't have to go near that car. At this point, I didn't know what to do, to be honest. I wanted to call my mum to come and pick me up, but given the argument that we just had, I stupidly convinced myself that calling her wouldn't be the right thing to do. I made my way to the end of the block, mentally preparing myself to wrap around the block and start heading back in the direction of the park that was my only way home. Just seconds later, though, as I reached the end of the block, the same car pulled out in front of me and came to a screeching stop. Not quite processing what was happening, I simply stopped walking and watched as the driver, an older man with a baseball cap and an unsettling smile that I could just barely make out in the darkness of his car, says, "Hey, you okay, buddy? You need a ride somewhere?" There wasn't anything out of the ordinary about his voice, but as he spoke to me, my stomach tied itself in knots. All I could do was mutter out a soft no before the man reached all the way over and opened the passenger side door. "Hop in, we can go anywhere you like, buddy." Snapping out of my state of shock, I darted off behind the car without saying another word. I heard the man try to call out to me as I had started running, but I couldn't make it out. I heard his car speed off as I continued trying to put as much distance between me and him as I possibly could. I made it a good few blocks away before I felt comfortable enough to stop running, and decided to finally start making my way back home. Not long after, though, I heard a car coming up behind me in a quick stop, which made my heart feel like it was about to shoot out of my chest. My nerves settled pretty quickly as I realized that it was my mum, who set out to look for me after I didn't come home. She rolled down her window and began yelling at me to get in the car, but something was off in her voice. She didn't sound angry, but more panicked, I guess. I did as she said, asking what was wrong as we pulled off. And she told me that she had just been by the park to look for me and saw a car which had the same description as the one that I encountered, partially blocking the road to shine its headlights into the park. She says that as she pulled up, the car quickly pulled back out and sped off. Call it mother's intuition, I guess, but she immediately assumed that I was involved somehow. Though I denied anything happening, as I've never really been someone who can talk about anything real with my family, my mum still reported the car to the police, and that was that. I've never told my family what really happened, and haven't really ever spoken about this until, well, now, really. This situation didn't stop me from going out for walks when I needed to de-stress, and I guess you can just credit that to me being a stupid teenage boy. I was certainly more cautious of my surroundings, but like I said, that was that. I never saw the man again, and I moved on with my life. I can look back now, though, and use this as an interesting story to tell people, I guess, but I truly was incredibly lucky to get out of that situation unharmed, I think. who knows what would have happened if I hadn't decided to leave that park, or if I hadn't been able to get away. Would I really have been able to bring myself to fight back if needed? Maybe I wouldn't be here now, or maybe I'd be left with much, much worse memories of that night. All I can say without a doubt is that that man had truly awful intentions. Of that much I'm sure, and I am very lucky to be here now. Moral of the story, be careful when you go out for walks at night. Always be aware of your surroundings. It doesn't matter who you are, how big you are, anything can happen if someone has bad enough intentions. So, we were going on a hike one day, and there's this spooky abandoned train tunnel in my state where a bunch of people died like 100 years ago, so now it's allegedly haunted. I brought one friend with me on the hike since it was a long one. The area and the scenery were beautiful, but the tunnel itself was something else. My buddy, his name is Ed, was a bit more nervous than me and didn't want to go too far in. I wanted to go as far as I could, which turned out not to be far because the tunnel was blocked by impassable debris. But wait, there was a small hole in the side of the debris mound, and it turns out that I could crawl through it. So I asked, "Hey Ed, you feel like crawling?" "Nah, no thanks, dude." So I took my pack off and coat and I squirmed through on my own. On the other side was the rest of the tunnel, but with water that went up to nearly the top of the mound on the other side, as far as the eye can see. I was disappointed too because I would have to swim in ice-cold, nasty water for who knows how long to keep exploring. So I decided no and to crawl back. My buddy Ed was nervous, but we weren't done yet. Next, we busted out just one tool for detecting ghosts, an EMF reader. As someone who is pretty scientific, I guess you could say, I tested it multiple times and made sure that it was working before bringing it. We decided to try and contact ghosts in the tunnel. I was pretty confident nothing would happen. We turned off all of our electronics and lights so it was pitch black and just the EMF reader on. I asked pretty basic questions, I guess you could say, to the ghosts. Asked it to come in front of my scanner so I'd know that it was there, etc. We did this for a while too, and there was nothing. No reading, no surprise, and so we headed back. We decided to keep my EMF reader on, and then as we're sort of walking back, suddenly it goes to 2 lights. I thought maybe our flashlights were causing it, so we turned them off. But no, still 2 lights. I reset the device, 2 solid lights. I say, that's interesting, maybe something's here. My adrenaline started flowing into my body now, but I was still skeptical. I started asking it questions again, and then my EMF signal got even stronger. And we both were getting chills, and the hairs on our skin were standing up. And it was around this time that we heard something. Kind of sounded like a distant cough, I guess you could say, but it was so fast that it was easy to dismiss it. I reset the device again, still getting a strong signal from something, and it's definitely not coming from us. I then said, "Is it alright if we stay in the tunnel with you a bit longer?" The meter instantly went back to 0. I was surprised, but confident now. I asked, "Do you want us to leave?" Then it instantly went back up to high. I was pretty convinced at this point, so we headed for the entrance to the tunnel and we discussed our experience. However, when we were at the entrance, we noticed that the EMF was picking up another signal just above and to the side of us now, and if you pointed it in a different direction, there was nothing. After that, we left, but we think that ghosts may have been hanging out by the entrance waiting for us to leave. You could always say that the EMF was faulty, I know that, or picking up something else, but I'm sure that that device was working. I tested it so many times before and after, and there was nothing on us producing the EMF reading. Also, considering that we didn't get any reading in there for the vast majority of the time that we were there, that says something too. But that cough of all things, that sounded so much like a person, and it was truly mind-boggling, and I'm still processing it.